COVID-19 state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of members to meet safely in person and presents imminent risk to the health of the attendees. Therefore, no physical meeting location will be available. To access the meeting remotely, join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using the URL that's on the agenda and on the webpage. If you do not wish for your name to appear on the screen, please use the drop-down menu and click on Rename to rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. To join by telephone, dial the number that's on the agenda and on the website and enter the meeting code that are there as well. If you wish to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, press *9 and wait to be recognized. Shall we do a call to order?
Yeah, roll call. Yes.
Roll call.
Board Member Calavita.
Here.
Happy birthday. Thank you for joining us on your birthday. Chair Chang.
Here. Happy birthday.
Board Member Harris.
Everyone's going to have to say it.
You don't have to say it.
Board Member Harris will not be here. Board Member Lefwich.
Here.
Board Member Levine.
Here.
Vice Chair Mizell.
Here.
Board Member Moore.
Here.
Board Member Owens.
Here.
And Board Member Ramsey. Does anybody see him? I don't see him. Okay, he is absent right now.
Okay, but we do have quorum.
Okay, we have quorum.
Great. Are there any members of the public that are here or commentary? Let's take a look here.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Here, my timer. We are. Okay. So, shall we have the first speaker?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You know, when you share your screen, then I lose my participants.
Oh yeah, that happened to me too.
No, I can get I just have to pull them up again. So Wendy Elfson.
Wendy Elfson, that's right. Wendy, are you ready to speak?
I am, thank you. Thank you, board members and members of the Department's Lead. I'm Wendy Elfson with the Berkeley Friends Meeting Racial Justice Action Team, speaking on the military equipment ordinance. I appreciate the ongoing work that you've done, the inclusion of Special Order 2020-007 on the tear gas pepper spray items, but I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that nowhere in the 709 policy is there reference to the council action on June 21st, which created policy 303.9. And since that recodifies the 2020 tear gas ban and also incorporates the AB 48 state law change that went into effect as of January 1st, I'd like to urge you to include that in the ordinance under all of the appropriate sections, and specifically under the purposes for tear gas and authorized use. I'd like to suggest that the authorized uses also call out policy 303, and that the purpose be revised, because right now, if you read it, it says there are a variety of situations where peace officers may use chemical agents such as self-defense, overcoming resistance, effecting an arrest, preventing escape, violent crime, or riot control, barricade, hostage situations, and dealing with dangerous animals. That does not state Berkeley law. Currently, tear gas may not be used. And under the other pepper spray and such, there's similar issues. So if you don't have time to make these detailed changes, because now you want to adopt something tonight, you can notify council that pursuant to the local ordinance that you are prioritizing these policies for review in the coming year in order to have time to consider them. You do have until October 25th under the state law. You could ask council to continue reviewing these specific sections while having adopted the rest as an alternative. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Mr. John Lindsay Poland. John Lindsay Poland, would you like to speak?
I just allowed him to speak.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for your work on this. This is an extra meeting, I know, and it's really, really appreciated. I will refer you to the email that was forwarded to you yesterday about the status of OC canisters, which based on evidence of use on the indiscriminate way in which they have their effect, even in the way that the language that be used originally, it should really be classified in the same manner as tear gas. I think that when there are state laws like AB 48, like AB 481, when there's a local law such as the action that the council took on tear gas, it can be tempting for a body like this to simply say, this will just, whatever the law says, whatever another body says is what should be the policy. But I really think that's abdicating the role that the accountability board should properly assume as an advisory body on policy, not just deferring to whatever the council did, whatever the state legislature did, but to really take on what is the appropriate form of use for these types of equipment. In that respect, I would support what Wendy Alfson just said about recommending or stating to the council that you will take under advisement further policies. It could be under the Lexipol policy, or as she noted, it could be under the guise of 481, which gives you the late October. But in any case, that the accountability board assume its role as an advisory body on the issues, which the council, to be honest, does not have the bandwidth to really take on. It is really the accountability board's issue. The one other thing I want to mention is a confusion that I think arose last meeting around whether the statement of authorized uses implicitly states what is prohibited. That's what kind of went round. That's what board member Ramsey said. And yet, when Lieutenant Montgomery said, but what about the use when we're training, when we're cleaning these weapons? Is that a prohibited use because it's not authorized? Suggests that, in fact, it is not implicit that whatever is not an unauthorized use is also prohibited. So I think that the board really does need to address this in some manner, and I hope you'll find a way to. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. I don't think we have other folks who would like to speak, but Kit Saganor.
Thank you so much. I want to echo what you have just heard, both in regards to the tear gas and also in regards to the authorized use. I'm at this point, it's very confusing if things that are not authorized are nonetheless permissible. And there is this issue about, well, what's use? So perhaps you could address this with putting in a definition of use, a definition of authorized, but you really do need to know not only what's authorized, but what is prohibited. So this really does need to be made clear. Then the other topic on your agenda tonight, as with the regulations, And I'm sorry, we don't have public comment on each item, but as I've spoken before, you know, I'm very concerned about there's be some way for an anonymous complaint to be followed up on if it is serious, if it's submitted with evidence. This is, you know, hopefully something that will never be needed, but it really does need to be there. And then a very specific thing on section 2A, there's been some language proposed. Let me see if I can pull this up on my screen so I can be looking at what I want to say. It's here somewhere. There we go. About a warning on the complaint form about how the content of the complaint can be used. If I had more time, I would suggest a change to the wording that's been suggested by board member Levine, excuse me, because at first reading, it looked to me like it was saying that it was a warning that the fact that the person had made a complaint could be used against them in a criminal case. And I know that's not what you meant. And I looked at it a little more closely. It's the content of the complaint, but still, I think the way it's worded right now, it's not really clear. And it needs, and I don't want it to have the chilling effect of someone feeling like, well, gee, I could get in trouble for making a complaint. And then one more thing, and that is that I don't remember whether it was a subcommittee meeting or meeting of the board, but I believe I heard a board member talk about sticking to policy and not making recommendations on operations. Well, and this again follows up with what Mr. Lindsay Poland was just saying to you, and that is, as I know you well know, in the charter of the city of Berkeley, it says that it is the power and duty of the PAB to make recommendations about all written policies, practices, and procedures. And in fact, it says to advise and make recommendations to the public, city council, and city manager. So it may be that if it's something about operations, it's to the city manager rather than the council, but it is one of your duties to work on not just policy, but policies, practices, and procedures. Thank you so much for taking my comment.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who would like to speak? I'm not seeing or hearing any. So I'm going to, first I'm going to stop the share. And we're going to proceed. I just want to make a note for the record that board member Ramsey is here with us.
Thank you.
Chair, could we also note the presence of
Yes.
General Larry, Sergeant Ledoux, and Deputy City Attorney Chang?
Yes, thank you. So we have all those members here. We appreciate them joining us. And board member Owens is here as well. I'm not sure if we recorded that she was on.
Yes, we did.
Okay, great.
Excuse me, one more thing. Lieutenant Montgomery asked me to text him when we got to the regulations.
Okay.
So if somebody could remind me maybe to do that.
Sure, absolutely. And we'll let him know we're pleased that he'll be joining us. Okay, so this is a special meeting and we're now rolling on to agenda item 3 with regard to old business. Continue consideration and recommendations of controlled equipment. Firstly, Director Lee, can you pull up the materials? And secondly,
yes. First, let me direct people's attention to, we were following my memo that was in the July 13th packet.
Right.
And that's page 45. It had gotten through tear gas at the bottom. I don't know if you wish to revisit it based on information that we've received. And Mr. Lindsay Poland's memo is in supplemental materials for the public's information.
Yeah, thank you. So if we could, do you think we need to pull up the memo or just have folks pull it up themselves?
No, I don't think so, because I'm pulling up the
Great. And do we want to suspend the rules, amend the rules, and permit Mr. Lindsay Poland to join in the conversation?
I'll move.
Okay, is there someone who wants to second it?
I will.
Are there any objections? Okay, so move then, suspending rules to permit Mr. Lindsay Pullen to join as a panelist. Director Lee, do you mind elevating him?
No.
Thank you. Being elevated based upon his expertise on the issue. Okay, so we have 7:09 in front of us. That's okay. So we're going to work through this today, and then we're going to work through the regulations as well. That's the plan. And so we need to work through efficiently while we're addressing these issues at the subcommittee. A reminder that we have the expertise of Board Member Ramsey and Board Member Moore. If I'm missing anybody, let me know who had already reviewed this. And we do have John Lindsay Pullen as well to provide some of his feedback. So can you remind us where we were at previously, Director Lee?
Yes, on my memo on page 45 of the July 13th packet.
Page 45.
But we were at the bottom. You had discussed tear gas.
That's
And
right.
what I had just said was it's up to you whether you want to revisit that based on the communication from Mr. Lindsay Pullen and the public comment this evening.
I think it's probably a good idea, but I want to check in with the rest of the board. So basically, the definition on a tear gas and whether or not the concentrated pepper spray was colloquially called pepper spray, or I think oleo capsicum, whatever that is called, OC. In some cases, it's classified in the larger canisters in the concentrated version. That is apparently what the Berkeley Police Department carries in its supply. Has been categorized as tear gas in some circumstances. So we should have a quick conversation about that, understanding that some folks have categorized it as tear gas, and to understand from a Berkeley perspective and from the perspective of the subcommittee members, which we should give a certain amount of due deference to, I think, because of the hard work they put in, about whether or not we need to amend or some of the language there on that basis. So what is the actual, I'm sorry, we're still on point 1. Director Lee, so how far down is that?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's stuck on the first page. If you need to do something, just go ahead and then we'll just wait for you. And Board Member Levine has her hand raised.
Well, I was going to say something about the first point, which is about the OC spray, and Mr. Lindsay Pullen's suggestion that it be included with the tear gas prohibition, which I agree, after reading the literature, that the distinction is not easy to make. In other words, that it's just as lethal, dangerous, and threatening, and shouldn't be carved out as something that's different. So I'm in favor of including that in the prohibition.
Okay, so we're gonna thank you. We're gonna talk that out to make sure that everybody understands exactly what we're talking about, because it can be a little confusing. That OC obviously is the pepper spray stuff, but there's a concentration differential here that I think we're being referred to in the material from Mr. Lindsay.
Well, just to finish what my thoughts are, that it's going to be, I think it's inappropriate to try to distinguish quantities when it's clear that you can magnify a quantity that's small by using it multiple times or multiple sprays, whatever. Unless I'm mistaken, it just saying you can push a button once but not twice is not a useful policy.
Thank you.
Productive.
And there's a number of people, and Board Member Levine, you can jump in as well.
I'm finished.
Okay,
Sorry.
we have a number of people. We want to talk about not just quantity, but concentrations and just to understand what the difference is. So Board Member Owens and Board Member Moore, Calavita, and then Captain Roleri.
So for me, there's a clear distinction between tear gas and pepper spray. The pepper spray doesn't spray as far as tear gas, so it's not the same as spraying pepper spray twice. Pepper spray twice is only going to go so far. You just spraying twice as much, whereas tear gas has a longer reach. And then I also have a question. I personally am comfortable with the tear gas because I hear some people have some reservations about it. But my question is, if they don't have tear gas to use for crowd control, what is the expectation as to what they will use?
So Board Member Owens, just to be clear here, tear gas is prohibited by the city, is my understanding.
It's prohibited under certain circumstances. So I think they can use it under certain circumstances.
So we want to be specific. My understanding is certainly for crowd dispersal.
It's prohibited altogether.
Prohibited.
Okay. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. You guys are right. We checked this last time. There is a flat prohibition. So we don't want to flex, obviously. And I see lots of folks, Board Member Ramsey is and Board Member Moore, we want to hit them as well since they were in the subcommittee.
So I'm looking at
established that there's a flat prohibition is from the legislative body in the city of Berkeley. So we do not want to alter that. We cannot alter it, in fact.
I'm looking at Special Order 2020-007, and it says in crowd situations, it does say it shall not be used without the prior approval of the chief of police or his or her designee unless exigent circumstances prevent the request. So it sounds to me that they can use it.
That's not tear gas. That's the OC canister.
Yeah, so that's like
Okay.
just to make sure we understand, that's what's colloquially called, pepper spray. It was OC made of pepper, capsicum.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that because that is an area of some confusion. We've now established, I want to make sure that, we understand what type of classifications and pre-existing rules are dealing with. We've now reminded ourselves from our last conversation and established that tear gas is not to be used in the city of Berkeley per the legislature of the city of Berkeley. And then I want to move on to Board Member Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I was just hoping that we could hear from Berkeley Police on this subject, and as well as we have a city attorney here. So we don't have to guess about these distinctions and clarifications. Let's get to the bottom of it and figure out exactly what we need to pull out of this language. Thank you.
Great. And so now I think we're talking about now, not about tear gas. We're talking about quote unquote pepper spray, OC. Board Member Calavita.
Yes, and so it's the canister version of OC that we're talking about, right? And that is, I think, what Mr. Lindsay Poland was talking about and the literature that we read. And I'm in agreement with Board Member Levine that there is a distinction there that it sounds like is not a distinction. I'm not familiar with what Board Member Owen said in terms of the distance that these sprays travel. But it seems to me that we could make a recommendation that OC canister is, for all intents and purposes, has a similarly devastating effect as the tear gas.
Okay. And so Board Member Calavita, it may have a similarly devastating effect as tear gas. Does that mean that it should be classified as tear gas, as John Lindsay Poland has suggested in some of the materials, that in some cases is classified as tear gas?
In some cases it is, and I understand the police department in some instances has referred to it as tear gas.
Okay, thank you. So we want to hear from the police department and also hear again from our board members, subcommittee members. Ramsey and Board Member Moore has chimed in on this, and also the DCA is here as well. Thank you, Board Member Calavita. And Captain Roleri.
Hi, good evening. So I want to right off the bat, and thank you, Board Member Moore, for asking for some clarification. Pepper spray or OC spray, the the same thing. They are not tear gas. Tear gas is a man-made chemical that is deployed in what is similar to like a, for lack of a better term, like a grenade. And you pop it, throw it, and it starts emitting for significant distance a mixture of chemical in a smoke form, and it expands to a large area. Pepper spray or OC spray it's water-based, and it is just that, is pepper, and it's in a water-soluble formula. And basically in 2017, in fact, the council, if you go back and take a look, we have the annotated agenda. The city council actually approved the use of tear gas in certain circumstances in crowd control for use for small or short areas. In other words, those the foggers, the short handheld foggers that can dispense tear gas, or excuse me, pepper spray. It goes about, it's about a 10 to 15 foot range of dispersal. Now that differs even more from what the officers carry on their belt every single day. And so I think what's happening here is a lot of things are getting, once again, confused and blended. All right. So yes, on July 9th, 2020, the city council banned the use of tear gas. They additionally banned, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the use of pepper spray and smoke during crowd control situations. However, officers can still carry it on their belt and use it in day-to-day operations for patrol. Now, the MK4 dispenser that the officers carry on their belt in day-to-day operations sprays a stream that is capable of traveling about 12 feet. And that's a very strong, it's just a small, it's a stream of, basically it's like a stream of water, like a squirt, no different than a squirt gun. So basically you can do short bursts of it, and you can direct it and aim it specifically at a specific person. That is not banned. So I want to make sure that we're all clear here. Yep. Tear gas, total ban. Pepper spray and smoke for crowd control use during the COVID-19 pandemic. But individual canisters, the MK4 canisters, are still carried by the officers, and they still may be used as a less lethal option for officers in day-to-day operation.
Okay.
I want to make sure that everybody's clear. And I want to make sure that the distinction, whether Mr. Lindsay Poland wants to claim that pepper spray and tear gas are the same thing, they are not. They are different. And I don't know where anybody got that the police department claims that they're the same. They're different.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm hearing from you, aside from the three kind of guardrails or classifications that we referred to, is that tear gas, in terms of a general classification, is chemical, and OC, which is colloquially called pepper spray, is going to be based upon, capsicum as a pepper. And from a policing perspective, just to ask you, is there ever a time where you've used something that's made out of OC that comes out, maybe not in the stream, that's not individually on your belt, but which could be considered something akin to tear gas? Has it been colloquially referenced as tear gas, even if it's just kind of like lay language?
Well, yeah, sometimes people use different terms because they don't know what specifically things are. But if you remember back in the day, people called mace, people carried mace. That was a chemical, that was an actual chemical that came out in more of a fog type. And that was more akin, again, that would be more akin to like a tear gas. It's a man-made chemical. We don't carry that, and we haven't carried that in more than a quarter of a century. In my 28 years in law enforcement, we've used OC spray, which is water-soluble pepper that sprays in a stream on the individual.
Great, thank you. And temporarily, there's currently a ban on the use of the more fogged version of OC, which is again the capsicum, because of the pandemic, due to perhaps some folks' respiratory issues that may be triggered by the use of that, versus the individual stream off your belt. Is that correct?
For crowd control use, correct.
Yeah, crowd control use. Okay. And then the one that's on your belt, I know that's in the rules here, but just to get everyone on the same page, is that called the MK4?
Correct. That's just a designation of the type of canister. You know, it's basically a small, maybe a 5-inch by 2-inch in diameter handheld that each and every officer carries on their belt.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let Board Member Ramsey speak now.
Hi, thanks. So I guess what Captain Roleri said, was aligned with what my understanding was. You have, the tear gas, which is, for lack of a better term, kind of the grenade, gas goes everywhere, that's been prohibited. And then there's two forms of pepper spray. There's the canister, and then there's the MK4, which is held on the belt. My thought, so I do think there is a natural distinction there. I don't think, a canister, which essentially can spray the same thing, just a little bit more widely or further, to me, I don't understand how that suddenly makes it akin to the chemical tear gas. But in any event, part of my concern is what I voiced the last meeting, which is sort of where this is sat with the council and our previous recommendation, regarding whether it could be used to crowd control and what the carve outs are. I just feel like we're being placed in a little bit of a odd situation where it's almost like we're being asked to, review this tear gas policy, which has been hotly debated, voted on by the council, still sitting with the council now in, quite frankly, just a sort of quick way. I don't feel like we have the, a wide range of experts that we're hearing from, particularly not from the operational side of police. We've got Captain Roleri here, but, in terms of general thoughts about the necessity of OC canisters to, from an operational standpoint, I just don't have a real sense of that. I have seen it used before, the canisters which spray wide in prison yards and so forth to control, larger groups of people. To me, my inclination is that it's a less than lethal that they need. They don't have tasers. We have a limited number of things. The other thing is rubber bullets, I guess, or batons. And so to me, it does seem like a reasonable option, but the bottom line is I feel like we're kind of we're moving haphazardly here. I feel like this should have, if we really are interested in trying to recommend a change to the council's tear gas policy, then it seems to me like that should have a separate subcommittee, and we should just address that, in a full on, analysis of it. I don't feel like we're doing that here, and we don't have that. I feel like this is, quite frankly, I think the council's initial full ban prohibition on tear gas, I listened to it. I was on the meeting that night, and that was pretty spur of the moment. Okay. And this to me feels kind of like the same. And when they did the spur of the moment, then they had to go back and so forth. And if people, Mr. Lindsey Poland and others really want to analyze whether we should have tear gas or not, let's analyze that policy completely separately and have it have its own subcommittee and try to get experts come in and talk about it. But it doesn't seem like, or at least I'm not going to support doing that right now. We've got the policy from the city council that's been approved. Another one sitting at the public safety committee. And it seems to me like for now, that should be the status quo. And if we want to revisit it, then someone asks for a policy review and we can set up a subcommittee.
Okay, thank you.
That's my view.
Thanks, I think that's helpful. Board Member Calavita?
Yes, I tend to agree with that, with the qualification that no one's talking about fiddling with the tear gas ban. I think we're talking about how to treat pepper spray, but I do think maybe in the interest of time and further, understanding of these things, that we should maybe at a later point have a full-fledged review of the OC canister policy. So I think in the interest of time, we need not do that now.
Okay, I think that makes sense as well. We want to focus in on what's in the language of the policy right now, making those type of assumptions about the difference between tear gas versus OC, one being chemical, one being a pepper-based spray. Board Member Leftwich and Board Member Levine.
I was just going to say, I agree with that as well. I don't think we should be making policy in this area tonight.
Okay, and it's also it's policy, but it's also there's been a legislative determination outcome, and we want to be very careful about doing that and making sure we have the proper rationales to send back to the council if we were to make any suggested changes to that. And so I agree a different subcommittee on that basis could be created. But Board Member Levine?
Yeah, and I also agree. I do think I have felt rushed about all of these reviews and would feel much more comfortable with further study about several things, but I wasn't on the subcommittee. But I do think that this is very important. And so when we have areas like this, perhaps we can list them as designated need for further study, because I don't want to make a decision that's implies approval of something that I wouldn't approve had I known the expertise, the science, the alternatives in policing experts' analysis. So I guess I'm just saying, make a list or something is a good idea. I would feel a lot more comfortable.
That's a very good idea.
Yeah, Director Lee, do you think it's a good idea maybe to drop in a comment next to this that for further conversation, potentially a subcommittee, but also as a flag that a potential question about whether or not OC canisters, the pepper spray based canisters should be reviewed at a later date in a different context. Right now, we're assuming OC is OC and tear gas is chemical tear gas. And my understanding is, as we all seem to have agreed, that the city has a prohibition on the use of tear gas. So that would mean that in the way that we're moving forward now, there would not be a prohibition of OC canisters. And of course, except for the current temporary prohibition based upon the pandemic, but not any kind of permanent ban. And in addition, they have permission based upon this language here to continue to use the MK4, which is the individual, lack of a better term, like a handheld individual pepper spray canister. That's where we would stand, I think, is what we're saying if we were to proceed this manner, but we should probably flag it in the document, either for reference, for advisement, for later advisement, but also for us as a reminder that we could come back and create a kind of a policy subcommittee.
Chair, I think it would be, I can certainly note it as added to your list of topics that you want to take up. But I wonder if you want to make a notation of that in your report to council, but that's up to you.
Are you suggesting that it's a good idea, or is it a constructive idea, or is not?
I think it's constructive, but I think
you drop it into the letter.
Up to you. Drop it into, well, I have to write whatever you're recommending. I have to write up and submit as a supplemental to the council for July 26th. So
Okay.
This could be another aspect of that. That's all.
Yeah, I think maybe it seems to be a consensus there that we should kind of, do we want to drop that in the letter to the city council, however, versus like us taking on a potential later on a new subcommittee on this issue of OC canisters? What do folks think about that?
And just to be clear, I would not support a subcommittee, but if we're gonna do something, let's have a subcommittee.
Okay.
But
And
I would vote against a subcommittee, and I suppose if someone thinks we should, from a public member thinks we should, then they should file a policy complaint.
okay. And then aside from the subcommittee issue, do you think we should drop it into a letter to the city council when we shift this back to them, as a notation that there was some conversation about OC canisters, and there's some members of the public had raised that it could potentially be classified as a tear gas.
Individually, I'd be fine with saying that they raised some concern about the current policy related to OC canisters.
Right. And being specific that while we understand that it's currently not permissible due to the pandemic, there are some concerns about its continuing use in any context.
I would say just that someone from the public, or I guess some individual, maybe some individuals, or just concerns that have been raised about this. But
Okay.
That's for me.
Okay. I think that's the direction we should go, Director Lee, but I don't want to hear from Board Member Leftwich, so we can then.
No, I agree with that. I was going to make a point about something else, but I agree that we should highlight it in the letter to council.
Okay, so we'll drop it in a letter to the council that there's been, there has been some conversation about this, so that merits a note. And later on, we could revisit whether or not we want to do a subcommittee. But right now, we're going to focus on this and the regs. Great. What's the next?
Could I be recognized in just one point on
Oh,
that?
sure. Yeah. Hi, Mr. Lindsay Poland.
Yeah. So one thing is that you said that during the pandemic, it can't be used. AB 48 also significantly restricts the use of any chemical agent for crowd control. Significantly requires a number of steps, restricts the circumstances in which it can be used. I think that's a really important piece to.
Can I ask about that? Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. But just before I forget, and so everybody's on the same page. When you say, so AB 48 is a really important reminder. When you say chemical agent, would you describe the OC canister, spray canister, as a chemical agent?
No question. Absolutely no question.
Can I just say that our current language incorporates that? We talked about this last week, where the language that we have says that it has to comply with local, state, and federal orders.
Yeah, I was just responding because Chair Chang said that the note might say that the only thing that is restricting its use now is the local.
Okay.
The one other thing I want to mention is that if you do a review, there is a local expert who has written about the medical impacts of crowd control weapons and agents, Dr. Rohini Har. She wrote the materials for the Physicians for Human Rights, has studied the studies, and is based in Berkeley.
Okay. That's someone we might invite in the future if there is. That's a good idea. If there is a subcommittee that's created to just talk about the issue of use of OC spray as well as OC spray canisters. Thank you. And Director Lee, you were kind of shaking your head. Do you mind if I ask you a little bit? John Lindsay Poland, you were nodding your head. So John Lindsay Poland had said that OC. I asked him whether or not OC is considered a chemical, and I'm trying to determine if that's a helpful kind of demarcation for us to understand the kind of gravity of the use of either or. Do you know if there is a history of referencing OC canister sprays as a chemical agent?
I agree with Mr. Lindsay Poland, and I don't think there's any. I don't think that's a debate.
That it is a chemical agent that as OC,
Yes.
Because it's processed in some manner. Okay. So while it may not be chemical in the sense of like quote unquote man-made chemical, it is processed. So it is a chemical agent in that sense. It's not a natural product in that you would come across.
There's a definition of it in AB 48.
Okay. So we have AB
48. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, do you mind?
Not at all. Chemical agent means any chemical that can rapidly produce sensory irritation or disabling physical effects in humans, which disappear within a short time following termination of exposure. For purposes of this section, the term includes, but is not limited to, chloroacetophenone tear gas, excuse my pronunciation, commonly known as CN tear gas, 2-chlorobenzamethylnitrate gas, commonly known as CS gas, and items commonly referred to as pepper balls, pepper spray, or oleoresin capsicum.
Okay, so oleo is specifically enumerated inside the scope of what OC is specifically enumerated, oleocapsicum, inside the definition of chemical in AB 48. chemical agents, sorry. Okay, thank you for that. That's a good clarification. Board Member Leftwich and then Board Member Owens, and then we should start to move on because it is 7:48.
I just wanted to discuss the threshold issue that was raised during public comment that we discussed it at some length, although it was at the end of our meeting last time, about whether or not if it isn't authorized, it's prohibited. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now, but I still feel like that's a thorny question.
Okay, so we'll definitely visit that right after we check in with Board Member Owens, who had raised her hand during the prior issue, and then we had Board Member Calavita.
Oh, help me to understand. AB 48 does not restrict the use of it. It just puts guardrails on the use. Is that correct?
So, John Lindsay Poland, do you want to speak to that? And
I'm not sure I understand the distinction between restricting use and putting guardrails. It requires
Guardrails means you can use it under these circumstances. So guardrails are protections that put in place. Doesn't say you can't use it.
no, it's not a,
You have to say within a
prohibition.
certain bound.
It
What's
is
that?
not,
a flat
it's
prohibition.
not, it's not a prohibition.
Okay,
But
so,
the circumstances that it requires are significant and extensive. So
understood. So AB 48 does not restrict the use. It just has guardrails around the use.
Well, that's restriction.
Doesn't
No,
prohibit.
it's not. Restrictions mean you can't use it.
I wouldn't understand it that way.
Or,
But
or ease.
For me, when I say restrict, I'm saying you can't
Go ahead.
use it. So I'll define what I mean when I say restrict.
Okay, so I think
So what I mean when I say restrict is it cannot be used.
don't use it. Okay, prohibition.
Prohibition.
Okay,
Prohibition.
okay, thank you.
But I'm just saying AB 48 does not, there's no prohibition on use. It's just guardrails put around it. So therefore, I think that what we have in place is and we have to follow the state law anyway. So I'm not sure I understand what the argument is about not using it at all.
So we have a little bit of like fine tuning languages coming from members of the panel and members of the public, and that's helpful. I see where we're going. We want to make sure to focus in on, understanding that we're addressing the language of this policy specifically as it is. And then if we want to address these kind of broader questions of tear gas versus OC, and the question of whether or not the proper classification is chemical versus non-chemical, which 48 clearly in the language of the definition captures OC inside a chemical. Those are things that I think should be addressed in subcommittee and possibly referred back to, we'll drop that into our note actually for the council to make sure they're aware of that, which I'm sure they are. But that this policy must comport obviously with local, state, and federal laws.
Can I get clarification on the note that you guys are proposing to put in there? Is the note saying that we want to form a subcommittee, or we think a subcommittee should be? What is this note saying?
No, it's just like a general advisement that would go, and Director Lee can correct me if I'm wrong, that would go with our return of this back to City Council. And right now, I don't think we're saying that we would set up a policy subcommittee, and that's something that maybe internally we would do and decide later on whether or not that makes sense, to create a subcommittee on addressing the policy itself of OC versus tear gas, and then sending that back up to council.
But it sounds like there's some note, something that you're proposing to put in, because we're going to give the council a response to this entire product.
Right. So the letter that will go with the product.
Right. But I thought there was something where someone said that we need to add something to it.
Yeah, I think
to this. And what is that something? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I think to be specific, we would be pretty kind of narrowly tailored, as Board Member Ramsey noted, of just stating that a member of the public had raised concerns about the classification of OC canisters as potential tear gas, something to that effect.
Okay, thank you.
So that we have Board Member Leftwich, do you still have your hand up from before, or do you have a comment?
It's still about the use question, so I can put it down, but it is kind of a threshold issue, so.
Yeah, so we'll get back to it. So Board Member Calavita and then Board Member Levine.
Yes, I wanted to also agree with Board Member Leftwich that I'd like to
Proceed to that.
visit this 709.2 thing about authorized uses and prohibitions and so forth. And I wanted people to know that though I wasn't at the meeting last week, I did listen to the whole recording, so I'm up on what people said about that.
Okay, thank you. And you were out of town too and on vacation, so we appreciate it.
Well, I listened this morning. Yeah.
Oh, okay, no, thank you. And Board Member Levine, and then Captain Roleri, and let's jump back into the document.
Yeah, just to clarify that, I think it was more than a member of the public. There were several of us on the board who expressed concern about several issues that we'd like to study further. And I suggested a list, and I thought there was some assent to that by Board Member Calavita and Leftwich. And so I do think that we should articulate more than just somebody from the public. We're here to make recommendations, and I think some of us think further study is needed.
Okay, so a conversation initiated by a member of the public, which then board members provided additional feedback and concerns with regard in the classification of the OC canisters and use thereof.
Some board members
Raised concerns about the necessity for further analysis and additional time to discuss that issue, and that the city council might want to take that up and consider that as well. And Director Lee, would it make sense to say that the board is considering whether or not to form a subcommittee on the issue, or is that just an invitation to be basically asked to form a subcommittee on the issue?
I have my hand raised because I do want to get clarity on what the note is.
Okay, so let's go to Director Lee. So
I'm kind of sorry I said anything, but
what's the best way to frame that? Board Member Calavita, do you have some language there?
I would simply say several members of the board believe that further study on this particular issue or this set of issues is needed, and they will be doing further analysis in the future. Something like that.
Okay, and the issue being?
The restrictions around OC canisters, otherwise known as pepper spray, and whether it should be treated in a similar fashion to tear gas. I mean, I don't know how specific we need to be. I just thought something general that we would revisit in the future OC canister.
Yeah, I think that last clause is good. Just be as transparent as possible, because that's what we're basically saying. Should it be treated in the same kind of manner as tear gas? Just a question. That's all.
Okay. Chair, I think it'd be helpful if you asked if there was any objection to.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So there's a number of hands up. We'll get to them. But are there any objections to the framing of that? There's going to be a letter that goes out to the city council with these changes that we make. Do you have concerns about how that was just framed? I'm not hearing or seeing any, so that's fine. Then in the meantime, just moving forward.
For the record, I would say I would abstain from it, but that's fine. We should just move on.
I as well would abstain.
I would also abstain.
Okay, board members, Ramsey, Moore, and is it Owens? Three have abstained from that.
Okay.
Thank just you. For the record, thank you. And I think next we have Captain Roleri.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, I know Chair Chang, you referenced a couple of times now, you're referencing tear gas and pepper spray as the same kind of thing. And so I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. And I realize that AB 48 calls it another thing. They blend them into the same category, pepper spray and tear gas, CN and CS, which are both different types of tear gas, if we want to get technical. But I just want to make sure that we're all clear that one is a chemical that's man-made, the other is is a pepper spray, and that's water-based with pepper. There's no other, you said, I assume, at one point you said, I assume that it's manufactured or treated, or you said you used some term. It is not.
Processed. So
Yeah,
the
processed
reason why,
or whatever.
yeah.
Okay, no, it's fine. I just want to make sure that we're clear. It is water with pepper. That's it.
Okay.
And every peace officer in the state of California, anyone who gets certified to be a peace officer in California has to go through both CN, CS. We have to feel the effects of it and go through it. And it's not pleasant, but you get past it. And then every academy in the state of California, every peace officer has to be sprayed with pepper spray in their eyes, and then they have to sustain a 90-second fight with a combative subject to show that they can get through it. So every single peace officer in the state of California knows exactly what it is and how it is and how to treat it. And basically most of it is either airborne. With pepper spray, you can use water or certain solvents that can assist with getting you back quicker. But I just want to make sure that you're very clear that one is a chemical and the other is basically pepper spray or pepper with water. And I realize that AB 48 defines them generally as chemical agents. So just want to make sure that we're very clear what we're talking about. Okay.
Yes, thank you. So you iterated that previously, and that is an important classification. The kind of complexity there is AB 48's definition, as you just noted, which has enumerated OC as classified as a chemical agent. But I understand what you're saying. It is pepper combined with water. And what I was thinking out loud is whether or not when they're processed together, if that is why AB 48 classifies them as a chemical agent. But that's not our conversation now. We don't have to make that determination, but it's an important classification here just for purposes of this conversation, but noting that that is out there, AB 48. Great, thank you, Captain Rolleri. And in the meantime, there's like 3 hands raised still. Are you're just holding up? Okay, so Director Lee, what do we need to do to finish this issue before we move on to this implied versus explicit?
Yes, I do have one more thing on tear gas, and that has to do with, remember we had flagged last time there was first the description is the MK9 OC spray, and then there's a description of MK4. And so I did get an email from Sergeant Ledoux,
who is here.
Yes.
For the record, thank you.
And maybe I should pull up.
Sure.
And so, Sergeant Ledoux, can I ask you, you just submitted some language without really saying anything, but I'm assuming that you are offering this language to drop in instead of this language here.
Okay.
Right.
Is that correct?
Manufacturer's description for the MK9.
Okay, so are we deleting this whole paragraph that I've highlighted?
Yes, that'd be my recommendation.
Okay, so let me share, stop
So
this
just-
share and
As a reminder,
share
is that
something else.
last time around we had this conversation, we were confused about the manufacturer's description of MK4 versus MK9.
Right, and the and what he sent me is intended to
Correct that.
is the substitute language to correct that.
Okay, great, thank you.
So
And you're going to paste it in the,
right,
thank you. Take your time. The screen, just so you know, it is not sharing anymore.
right, I know, because I want to
Cut
pull
it.
it up before I share.
Okay, thank you, Sergeant Ledoux, and we'll take a look at that clarifying language. And as a reminder, again, Captain Rolleri, the MK4, which I think is what that section is talking about. Is that section talking about MK9 or MK4?
That section's for MK9.
Nine.
Okay.
Just came because originally that was thought to be in there, but the government code explicitly calls out that the small ones are not to be reported in this, so that was removed.
Oh, I see. Interesting. Okay, thank you. The small ones being the ones that you carry on your belts.
Right.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Well,
So,
yes,
I'll read it out loud for purposes of accessibility. The MK9 features an easy-to-use trigger handle, is intended for use in crowd management, and will deliver 14 short bursts of OC at an effective range of 18 to 20 feet. This 1.3% MCOC aerosol product utilizes a stream delivery method, providing a target-specific, strong, concentrated stream for greater standoff. What does MC before the OC mean? OC, I assume, means oleocapsicum.
Let me look at it, but I think that's from the concentration. I think it's micro concentration.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So are we going to drop that language in then, Director Lee? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think this is pretty straightforward. It's the manufacturer's description. So
okay,
this is, not something that we need to worry about, whether we agree with it or not. I mean,
it is their description, right? And it just happened to be that we had the wrong device description. There was a smaller version, the MK4. So that's the MK9, and once you drop it into the body, it'll kind of be pretty clear what we're doing.
Right. So I will say substitute.
Okay, so that's super helpful there. That created a lot of confusion the last time around. Great. So I think is there any questions about this or objections? We want to then move on to kind of we have got to meet your issue with explicit, implicit, and then it is 804. We still have to do regulations. Okay. Am I hearing or seeing any? So Director Lee, where can we move on from here to discuss?
I was hearing that people wanted to go back to 709.2.
Okay.
Unauthorized uses. I heard a couple people saying that. Is that correct?
Authorized, not authorized. 709.2 policy. It is a policy of the Berkeley Police Department that members of the department comply with the provisions of Government Code Section 7071 with respect to military equipment.
Well, can I go ahead?
Sure. Yes.
I was actually, so we wrestled with this last time. The issue being, are only authorized uses allowed? Is that implicit that anything that isn't authorized is prohibited or not? And I remember mentioning that perhaps we need to include a definition of use so that maybe it's deployment. It doesn't mean routine cleaning or something like that. But it's a difficult issue. And so in the interest of time, because it is difficult and because we've got so much to do tonight, I'm wondering if maybe that could just be another issue that we flag for council, that there's, a discussion about that issue and that they may want to think about it, because I'm not sure if we want to take the time to get through it ourselves tonight.
Okay. What are thoughts on that? And that'd be going into a note, Board Member Levine, and then.
Well, I agree. I was the lone dissenter last time on this issue. And I think that Lieutenant Montgomery brought up this example that illustrates we do need to clarify what use is, because I don't think anybody intended for use to include cleaning weapons, teaching how to use them properly, how to store them and care for them. So I do think this needs some articulation at some point. But I also agree it's hard to come up with language in a big group situation. And but I do think it's important, and this could be part of that list
okay.
that I'm referencing.
I think we have Director Lee and then Board Member.
Sorry,
Moore.
no, that was left over. Sorry.
Did you skip me, Chair?
Yeah, I apologize. Board Member Calavita and then Board Member Moore.
No. So I did listen to this conversation from last week, and I do think it's very important not to leave things implicit if we can make them explicit. We've seen this problem with the charter Some people think different things are implied in the charter, but they're not explicit. And I actually would propose some language that might satisfy everyone. I also think that the examples that Lieutenant Montgomery brought up are important to include here in some way. So I would say in this 709.2, after that one sentence, consistent with 7071A1E, uses of, that's part of the code, the government code that section is referring to, 7071.
Yeah.
Uses of military equipment for purposes in a manner or by a person not authorized by this policy are prohibited, period.
Okay. Uses of military. Can you slow down a bit? Director Lee is literally typing in as you're writing, saying.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So consistent with 7071, parens A, parens 1, parens capital E, uses of military equipment for purposes in a manner or by a person, and that's taken from the government code, not authorized by this policy, are prohibited.
There's a little bit of a lag time with her typing in because
just because I don't type that fast. Okay.
Well, I didn't expect you to. I just wanted people to hear it maybe and see if they agree.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
It's helpful to hear it and also for me to see it actually inside the document.
Right. I thought this. I'm just putting this up there so people can see it. Uses of military equipment.
701A1E, uses of military equipment. Sorry,
for purposes, comma, in a manner, comma, or by a person not authorized by this policy or in this policy are prohibited.
Okay.
Wait, I'm not finished.
Okay.
For the purposes of this provision, comma, uses, in quote, does not include activities associated with maintenance, transportation, or training.
Okay, that's helpful. I like that language. We'll check in with the folks in the department here too. Maintenance, training.
Does not include activities associated with maintenance, transportation, or training.
Okay. Okay, consistent with section 7071A1E, uses of military equipment for purposes in a manner or by a person not authorized in this policy are prohibited. For the purpose of this provision, quote unquote uses does not include activities associated with maintenance, transportation, or training.
And I think that it accomplishes two things. One, it makes explicit what may be implied. People said last week that it was implied and unnecessary, but I think we've seen over time that we need to make things explicit. And second, it solves the problem that Lieutenant Montgomery raised, that, and this is throughout this 709 policy, that when use is talked about in all these different sections, it's not referring to simple things like maintenance.
Okay, I like that. Let's do a little bit check in. And so I thought Board Member Moore just had his hand up. He just dropped it. Board Member Moore, do you want to speak?
No, I'm good, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. So, and then we have Board Member Ramsey.
Yeah, just real quickly. I mean, we voted on this. It's really a motion to reconsider, which is fine. I don't want to get technical into, the procedural requirements of that and so forth. But in any event, I understand the desire to sort of have everything be clear, but the reality is you're not going to include everything. I mean, even the statement here that says for the purposes of this provision, usage does not include maintenance, transportation, or training. Somebody else is going to think of something else, or there's going to be something that comes up. And then people are going to say, wait a minute, this is not one of the explicit uses. If it's not training, I don't know what it's going to be, tomorrow or whatever. So I'm voting no on this. I'm not, raising a point of order that motions to reconsider are supposed to be brought by people who voted for the motion. Fine, we have another motion. But I mean, it seems like we should just vote on this and move on. Everybody knows what the issues are. That's my thought.
Thank you. Board Member Levine.
Well, no, I think I think this is excellent, and I do think there's always arguments about what legislation means. And the problem we've had with the charter is that there's a lot implied, but we've had real roadblocks to movement in the direction that's implied because it's not stated. So this is helpful, at least on this issue, and why not make it clear?
Okay.
So that's in support of this, and if I need to make the motion to include this language, I will, since I did vote in favor of it last week.
Which you may. So Director Lee, as a point of order, Board Member Ramsey is saying that we should, because it was voted on previously, be raised as a motion from someone who approved it previously. Does that make sense? Is that okay?
Well, he's pointing out that what he pointed out is correct, but he's also not going to raise a procedural objection.
So he's not going to raise an objection, but do you think we should do a motion here for this language, given the raising of this point?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think you can make a recommendation on this language without a vote.
Yeah. Okay. So, Board Member Levine, it sounds like you have the first motion.
Well,
Okay.
I'll make that motion, yes.
That's the motion to include this language.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Board Member Levine has seconded, and then we're going to do a.
No, I made the motion.
Member Leftwich.
I'm sorry, Board Member Leftwich. I apologize. You got your pictures are right next to each other on the computer. Should we do a vote?
Is there any more discussion?
Are there any other concerns or questions about this? Objections? I'm sorry. Board Member Moore.
I would just like to make the point that this is going to open up a slippery slope. They're going to find other language that wasn't added, and we're going to be back here trying to find other ways that we're having this implicit, explicit conversation.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Calavita.
I'd like to make a friendly amendment to this and say, does not include activities such as those associated with, so that it may not be limited. I agree with Board Member Ramsey that there may be other routine daily activities.
Sure, thank you. So such as kind of opens it a little bit more for further, could potentially be a discretionary consideration, you know.
Want to add the word routine activities?
Those associated with routine activities.
The question is whether do the mover and the seconder agree with this friendly amendment?
I agree with it.
Okay. The mover does agree with the friendly amendment, and
Can I also just add, then, okay, you've got routine uses, and this is why I'm voting no on this. Then you've got issues about recruitment. You've got about uses in pictures, or uses in posters or whatever. So I'm voting no on this. This is just, to me, you're not going to cover everything.
Okay. Board Member Calavita, you still have your hand raised? Is that from previously?
No, I didn't mean to.
So do we want to add, did you not finish your amendment? Do you want to add routine to that language?
I would just put such as. I mean, I don't mind it in routine, but I don't.
Such as those associated. Okay, so we have that language with the friendly amendment, and it's which was okayed by the mover. Any objections, commentary at this point? I'm wondering if you
probably need a vote, don't we?
I think so.
We need a roll call vote on this, Chair.
Yeah, I agree. So let's do a roll call vote. Instead of consensus.
Okay. On the motion to include the language that you see on the screen, Calavita?
Yes.
Chang?
Yes.
Leftwich?
Yes.
Levine?
Yes.
Mizell?
Yes.
Moore?
No.
Owens?
No.
And Ramsey?
No.
Okay, motion carries.
Okay, cool, thanks.
5-3 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-3.
Are there 8 of us here today?
Yeah, one absence.
Oh, that's right. Okay, great. Good conversation. Thank you. Can we move forward to the next item. It is 8:17. We have regulations, so we have to call up Lieutenant Montgomery to come on board once we hit that. So what's the next item on?
The next one is 709.6.
And that's per the
one. This is
per your memo.
pretty minor, I think.
So for those in the public who are following, it's on the memo from the July 13th supplemental materials, that the memo that Director Lee drafted, which is page 45, I think, of the supplemental.
No, not the supplemental, the July 13th packet.
Sorry, the packet. Yeah. Page 45 of the July 13th packet. Okay. 709.6, coordination with other jurisdictions. So what was the concern again here? If there's a remind us.
It was clarifying language to drop acquisition in here.
Okay. The Berkeley Police Department may borrow and or temporarily use controlled equipment in exigent circumstances without following the acquisition requirements in BMC 2.100.040. However, the department must take the following actions. And there's like A, B, C. So it's clarifying language. It doesn't change the substance of the.
Right.
Yeah. Just adding acquisition in red for those who can't see this in front of requirements. I think it's just clarifying language. We don't have to have a long conversation about this. Is there any type of concerns about adding acquisition? Thank you. Vice Chair Mizell has his hand up.
Could I ask why acquisition was added? It would seem to me to have a small possibility of this being read as limiting what requirements would apply. I don't think this policy even affects the policy, to be honest, because I think it has language itself. But I guess is what was the thinking with adding that versus just leaving requirements?
Okay, do folks remember? Honestly, I don't remember.
I think it's because that's what the BMC section cited has to do with acquisition.
Okay, BMC 2.100.040.
But maybe just one of the subcommittee members have a better recollection about that.
So I don't remember if other folks recall, but the BMC 2.100.040 is the actual citation is listed there. So even if we didn't have acquisition, presumably there should be enough reference to that citation to address what exactly is being spoken about. But so I personally don't have a problem with acquisition there or either way.
Chair, I just want to throw, I don't have an issue with it. I was just curious.
Okay, thank you. So are you satisfied with the reason, Vice Chair?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the explicit referring to this section makes it very clear what requirements have to be followed.
Okay, thank you. So no one there doesn't seem to be an issue with this otherwise. Are there any other questions? Just a clarifying kind of grammatical aspect to this. The citation is there. Okay, let's move on. I don't think we need to do anything else. Consensus, yeah. 709.9. Instead of concerns, we changed to questions may also be directed. That seems more grammatical, maybe slight tone change, but not by much. Again, instead of concerns, complaints. Let's try to remember having this conversation. A director complaints. It's a more kind of formal language associated with.
Right, because when you're contacting IA, you're making a complaint.
You're not raising a concern.
And that's different from, I don't understand something and I want to ask a question. So that
okay. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, so by consensus, we're going to proceed with these changes. And 607.
Typo on complaint, it's misspelled.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. There's an A after I. Well, thanks. And then the stuff in blue,
these are links
in
blue, right. And then
you added the red 607.
This was added by the department. So just correcting, 428, this is the title. And then because we dropped in risk assessment earlier in the policy, then it was appropriate to add this among the referenced policies.
Okay, 607, operations planning and deconfliction.
Yeah.
And we have a hand raised with Captain Roleri.
Yeah, I wasn't at last week's meeting, but I wanted to clarify. I wanted to go back up to both the, there was 3 sections where I saw the Colt M4 rifle, the Remington 700, and the Barrett 99. There was language dropped in there that talks about policy 607 in each one of those. Is there a way that you could scroll?
Yeah, let me get there.
Yeah, she's gonna roll it up now.
Are you, if you're looking at it, do you know can you tell me the page number of the policy?
Hold on, let me, I can look at it on it. I gotta hop out of here. Hold on one sec.
Okay, we'll see who gets there first.
It's up towards the top. I know that. Give me a second. I've got for the draft I'm looking at, which I think is the same. It's page 3 towards the bottom. It's in blue. Authorized uses.
Okay. All right, and this is manufacturer description of the Colt M4, military Colt M4, M5, yeah, M4. Sorry.
No, yeah. It's the. Give me a second here.
So authorized uses used in the defense of life or great bodily injury to potential victims of violent crimes, general public, and officers. New sentence, which is in red. Use of the firearm must comply with risk of policy 607, operations planning and deconfliction.
Yeah. So that was something we specifically talked about at this subcommittee, and we all agreed that was not that doesn't make sense, and that's not practical in the use and day-to-day operations, or even if there was a planned operation and something changed rapidly. Basically, 607 talks about planned operations. So we had a lengthy discussion about this with regard to our policies and which firearm is the best to be used in different situations and based on the judgment of an officer who's on the scene of a situation. So basically what you have written in here, if we had a school shooting at Berkeley High and people are being actively shot inside the school, you're basically saying by dropping this in here that an officer can't use the rifle without going through the risk assessment of policy 607. So I see a major issue here.
Can I just say now that I think there's a misunderstanding here, Captain. I'm not sure that that's what people were saying in this. As it was discussed last week, at least, what they're saying is not that you'd have to go to a commander somewhere off scene, just that the officer who's using the weapon wherever they are should consider the same factors that are laid out in 607.3.
It's not approval. Is that what you're saying, Board Member Ramsey?
Yeah, that's as I understood the discussion.
If I'm remembering correctly,
I remember exactly what you're saying, and this is actually what was discussed last week too when you weren't here, was that there is not a requirement to go to an off-scene person. This was, as we understood it, or as people discussed it last weekend, Lieutenant Montgomery, that this section 607.3, which is entitled risk assessment, they're just saying that, hey, these are the kind of factors that an officer who's on the scene should comply with. And it's only that risk assessment. It's not the rest of the policy.
Okay, so
thank you for that reminder.
That's as I remember it. Now that we're talking about it.
We were engaged with Lieutenant Montgomery in this conversation, right? Is that correct? From other
members? But at the subcommittee, he's absolutely right. We 100% agreed that you should not have to go to someone who's off scene. And I think the full board agreed with that last week as well. This, as we understood it, was an attempt to have an on-scene officer who's making the decision whether to use whatever weapon he's holding in his hand, considers these factors. That's it.
So, Captain Roleri, what part of this do you think, when you're reading it, and perhaps you didn't have much time as previous, the group that reviewed this last week, but would suggest that it would require some type of pre-approval to pick up that weapon on the scene?
So 607 though. So policy 300 dictates when and when not an officer can use the weapon, right? Can fire the weapon, right? And we also have we also have, I don't have the policy number off the top of my head, but our tactical rifle policy, which basically we want to have officers be able to make the judgment on scene during a rapidly evolving and dynamic situation. We want them to use the firearm that best suits the situation. My recollection of 607, and I'm trying to pull it up as I talk here.
But it's not 607, it's 607.3.
And it's on, 607 is on page 83 of the July.
And as I understood it, this was just that the on-scene officer, yes, they have to comply with use of force policies, but they also should just be looking at these factors, considering these factors and deciding whether or not to use their weapon. But it's only 607.3. It's not saying that you have to comply with policy 607.
Okay, so should we say that an officer should consider policy 60, is it 607.3.1, where it talks about the risk assessment form, which talks about photographs, including aerial photographs available?
I don't know. If there's no photographs available, then they won't use photographs. I mean, it's those factors that are there. So you maybe you should say may consider, must consider.
Must consider versus comply.
Okay.
Is the comply language something that's making you concerned about the operational aspect of this, Captain Rolleri?
Yeah, because the policy 607 refers to operations planning, pre-planned operations, such as a warrant service or some other type of pre-planned event. So we're now we're talking about officers having to consider three different policies, and including this one. So that's why I'm saying when you put a must in there, to me that's a shall. So basically, what you're basically telling, you're confusing officers again during operational situations where they're going to have to consider. You're basically saying that they have to consider 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other issues.
You guys are pretty smart. There's a lot of factors that go into deciding what's reasonably objective. You know, reasonably necessary, reasonably objective. There's like a list of 10 factors that the Supreme Court lays out. You guys are super smart. You figure this out, training, you develop. But I don't think anyone here is trying to say any officer needs to go to an off-scene approval. What they're saying is, hey, we're trying to give some idea of factors that generally would be considered, and this was a list. Now, maybe section 607.3 should be put back in because risk assessment is actually the title of that subsection. And that was some confusion here. I know last week was where it said risk assessment and operations planning and deconfliction. People were asking what those are. Those are actually just the titles of the subsection and the section. So, I mean, it could just say use of a firearm, an officer, whatever, must consider, factors laid out in section 607.3, period. But I guess there were numbers change, if numbers change, et cetera. Now, I mean, I understand now you think, okay, these are factors that shouldn't be considered, but that's what the discussion was. It was definitely not about trying to have the same requirements of the pre-planned operation that's covered by 607. They were looking for a list of factors that someone should consider before they decide whether to fire that kind of weapon.
Yeah, and they grab that kind of weapon. Absolutely. That's what I recall too.
I grabbed that as kind of an example that was out there where there was already a list. And to the extent that an officer doesn't have those in the spur of the moment, then they won't have to consider them.
Right. So how about your language? And we have two other people who are in line to speak to, but Board Member Ramsey.
That's how I remember it.
That is how I recall it too. And I think it was a good rendition of that. Would Board Member Ramsey, though, do you want to reiterate your language and we could put that into the editing here with use of the firearm
I'm happy to move to put, so use of firearm.
Officers.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
How about an officer considering the use of this firearm should consider the risk assessment section of policy 607.
Perfect. I'm good with that. That's what I think people are trying to do.
Considering
one more time, please, Captain Rolleri.
Use of this firearm. Or an officer, no, I forgot it.
An officer considering the use of
this firearm should consider the risk assessment section.
Hang on, she has to type it in. Officer considering the use of the firearm should consider
this firearm.
Yeah, we'll change that later. Should consider. You want to do 607.3.1? So it's
the risk risk assessment section
Okay, risk assessment section of section.
Of policy 607.
Okay, that's good. And do you want to enumerate and specifically name the risk assessment section, which is 607.3.1?
That's what it's called.
Just
Want
as
to make it clear that it's just saying that you just want them to consider the factors set forth in the risk assessment?
Right, because
So then they'll just say that. So it should consider the factors set forth in the risk assessment section of policy 607. That's my motion. I don't know if there's a second.
I second that.
That looks fine. And just a minor grammatical change, Director Lee. Instead of the firearm, it should be this firearm. It's not that big of a deal, but this firearm. Okay, so someone is, there's a motion for.
I seconded it.
Okay, Captain Roleri just raised his finger. You're trying to add something?
Yeah, so part of what I was trying to get at is this the language that we just changed was also dropped into the use of the Remington 700 and the Barrett 99. So all
Yeah, my motion is that they be changed across the board throughout this policy, wherever that language is.
Yeah, it's in 3 locations that I noted.
It's all 3 should be changed to comply with
Remington.
That's my motion.
Okay, so here with the M4 and then the
And,
Remington.
you can see if Board Member Moore agrees.
Board Member Moore, do you want to- okay, so you have a motion to put this in all 3 areas with the different weapons that are just referenced.
Can I make a comment, Chairman Chang?
Sure. Yeah, Board Member Lindsay has a comment.
No,
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Member of the public.
I think, no.
So
And then, Deborah Levine, Board Member Levine.
I think I raised this initially in the subcommittee, and my intent all along was that it be for pre-planned operations. Because actually 607.3 does refer to supervisors, consulting supervisors. There's other considerations in whether to deploy the firearm, but among them has to do with discussions with the supervisor. And so I don't really think that referencing 607.3 for non-pre-planned operations makes sense here. So I would much prefer something that says pre-planned uses of this firearm shall comply with. That is, there's something that the members of the department they're planning out, they need to do something, and they're trying to figure out what equipment to bring. And that's where this comes in.
Okay, I mean, here I got a couple of points there. One, there is already policy 607, so they have to follow 607. So all the pre-planned operations have to follow 607. So we don't need to take every other policy and incorporate it into this one. My understanding from what we talked about at the subcommittee and what we agreed to, and I'm 90%, 99.99% that Board Member Moore is going to agree on this, was we discussed exactly what Mr. Lindsay Poland just suggested. It was discussed, considered, discussed with the department, quite frankly, rejected. Then what we added in was the idea of having this language that talked about an officer on site. All the pre-planned stuff is already covered. It's covered in 607. So this was about on-site officers. We were looking for some factors that they should consider, and we sort of thought that 607.3 was already a nice, tidy list. So that's why it's put in. If people don't want to have this list for non-pre-planned operations, then let's just eliminate the sentence. All the pre-planned stuff is already covered. So that's my motion still is as it is written for those reasons. And I'll defer to Board Member Moore as to whether he wants to withdraw his second or not.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Moore.
I just want to comment quickly. That is exactly the rendition that I remember how this went down. 607 was used for a matrix. So we had factors for the police to consider when they were using any kind of rifle weapon. So what we try to do, instead of creating new lists, new policy, we wanted to go ahead and redirect them to policy that has already been created. And so that was the thinking behind bringing 607 here. This is why we wanted everybody to come in and bring their perspective to this discussion, because without the community members, we wouldn't have had this matrix talk in the first place. We brought this 607 language in order to have guidelines for the sniper rifle, for the M4, and for the Barrett. So that's all I wanted to add to that.
Okay, I think we're ready to do a vote on this, and this is a motion to put this same language across the three different, I think they're firearms is a proper reference. And obviously it's referencing some type of multifactorial on the scene analysis by officers based upon 607. Is that okay? I'm sorry. Should we do a vote now?
Can I make one subtle change just to try to avoid confusion? And I would say use of this firearm in a non-pre-planned situation.
Okay, and so we're going to do that. Use of this firearm in a Director Lee, do you hear that? Yeah, in a non-pre-planned situation. Is situation a good term, Captain Roleri, or?
Event.
I'm sorry, Board Member Levine.
I just thought maybe event.
Event?
I don't know.
Captain Roleri, what do you think is a proper term? Pre-planned operation?
Operation, situation.
Okay.
I'm reading. Hold on. I'll circle.
Sure.
Give me 1 second. Incident.
Incident. Yes,
Okay.
good.
Okay, incident. That's fine.
Yeah.
We just want to align with the language you use and not to change the meaning of what we're trying to say here too. Incident, I think, covers situation, covers operation, covers da 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 da. Okay, so we have this language here in the motion, and sorry, Board Member Moore, are you okay with the addition of the language?
I am.
Okay, and let's do a vote on this, because this is going to be put into the authorized use section, the same sentence into each of the firearms. And my understanding is there's 3 of them, if I'm not incorrect. Oh, rifles, I'm sorry, okay. So the various rifles. Can we do a vote, Director Lee?
Roll call, sure. On the motion, Board Member Calavita,
I don't feel equipped to vote on this, so I'm going to pass.
Abstain?
Abstain.
There's no such thing as pass.
well, that means I'm going to come back to you after I go through the rest of the.
All right, I'll abstain.
Okay. Chair Chang,
Yes.
Board Member Lefwich,
Yes.
Board Member Levine,
I should have said this before, but there's one word that would make a difference to me. I think that instead of should consider, must consider. This is about training and the totality of the circumstances. So
Okay.
I think so. That
Can
would
we roll back to an amendment of the motion then? Is that what the appropriate point of?
I don't know.
Director Lee, should we, although we started the roll call.
well, it's technically too late, but we could ask the mover and the seconder.
Yeah, I'm good with the way it is. I'm not accepting that amendment.
Okay, so Board Member Levine, you'd have to say no, and then, because it's too late. I do see.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, Board Member Mizell.
Well, wait a minute. So what did you put down as my vote?
It's a nay, I think, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Vice Chair Mizell,
Abstain.
Board Member Moore,
Yes.
Board Member Owens,
Yes.
and Board Member Ramsey.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Okay. And
5-1 and 2 abstentions.
5-1 and 2. Okay, great. Thank you. And so now, Director Lee, do you mind going through the various rifles and adding this in as the last sentence?
No, I'll do that later.
Okay, so you remember to do that.
To
Okay.
sit here and watch me edit.
Okay, let's move to the next. We're down to, I think you just. You're right, 709.11 compliance. So the red language has been added underneath the first paragraph here. I'm just going to read it really quickly for accessibility purposes. The department's audit and inspection sergeant will ensure that department members comply with this policy. The audit and inspection sergeant will conduct an annual audit with assistance from members of the Professional Standards Bureau. Any violations will be referred to the Internal Affairs Bureau and handled in accordance with General Order P26, which is a personnel complaint procedures. All instances of non-compliance will be reported to the City Council via the annual military equipment report. The red language is, the City Council shall be the governing body required for this policy. The Police Accountability Board shall review and make recommendations to the City Council with the same procedures and requirements of the Police Equipment and Community Safety Ordinance as described in the Berkeley Municipal Code section 2.100.040. So we added that last language as read in the red. Any questions about this? Board Member Moore, your hand is still up from previously. And Board Member Leftwich?
Yes, I don't really understand that first sentence. Sounds kind of awkward. The City Council shall be the governing body required for this policy. What?
Being required to do what?
Yeah, I just don't understand that sentence.
AB 481 refers to.
I can chime in here real quickly too. AB 41 talked that there had to be basically a reference to the governing body, and it described what the governing body must be. It had to be elected officials, essentially. It had to be elected officials. So here they're just making clear that for the purposes of this, in our city, the City Council is the governing body required for this policy. Then members of the public wanted to make sure that the police accountability had some role here because we're not elected. So we would not have qualified as a governing body under the legislation. And so here they're saying, okay, the City Council is the governing body, but then they added this additional language that said the Police Accountability Board shall still review and make recommendations to the City Council.
Okay.
Same procedures and requirements, et cetera, et cetera. That's why that is.
Okay, it's kind of laying out the authorization lines of authority. City Council has governance authority, and PAB has advisory authority vis-a-vis the City Council, with the same procedures that the Police Equipment and Community Safety Ordinance and requirements of such as described in the Municipal Code. Is that does that make sense, Board Member Leftwich?
Yes, it just seems a little awkward, but I
agree, but it was because the state statute said the governing body has to be elected officials.
Okay. Is there any way?
So it's required by state law.
Correct.
Should we? I don't know. So for that first sentence, just to be very, very quick about this, the first sentence, Board Member Ramsey, is there?
I think the first sentence is fine. That's what I'm saying. Okay. I'm not recommending a change.
Okay. I think Board Member Leftwich is a little concerned about the grammar there, but if it's understandable.
Whatever. I don't care that much. I don't love it, but I don't care that much. So.
Okay. I think it's understandable. The grammar is a little awkward, but it is understandable given what Board Member Ramsey just described. And also, I think if someone sees this, they would probably understand it. Is there any concern that it would be not understandable? Board Member Levine?
Well, you could just correct it easily by eliminating the first sentence and saying the Police Accountability Board shall review and make recommendations to the City Council, the governing body in Berkeley, who shall blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure,
that's one way to do it. Any thoughts about that? About making that change?
Like that. I prefer.
Okay, do you want to make a motion to make that language? Board Member Leftwich? Or I'm sorry, Board Member Levine, and then Board Member. Okay. So the Police Accountability Board shall, okay. Blah, 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 make reference to City Council. Do we need to say which is the governing body?
No, but what was the rest of what you said, Board Member Levine?
The governing body in the city of Berkeley. Okay. And then, is there any need to change anything further?
I thought you were going to delete the first sentence.
Delete the first sentence?
Delete the first sentence.
Okay.
But I think that just corrects the grammar.
Or any more comments on that? We'll move to a vote on this. Okay, so we have, Vice Chair Mizell.
I'm a vote no, because I don't think it's necessary. I think AB 41 lays out quite obviously that city council is that body. And I, on my own note, when I filed the complaint during, earlier in this process, the city attorney's office has not ever responded to that complaint. But one of the points I brought up was the definition of governing body approval process. Obviously, city council is the governing body. There's zero questions of that. The approval process and whether we could be encompassed in that language in this city, given our charter mandated responsibilities and the responsibilities council delineated in the police equipment and community safety ordinance. I wouldn't put this in there. I think it's unnecessary. I think we know council is, I think AB 41 makes it very clear. I think this is unnecessary and potentially hurts that argument that we may have, a greater purview than some in the city may believe. But ultimately, that's a legal question that was never clarified.
Are you saying we shouldn't reference governing body at all, or you just didn't
I wouldn't. I don't like it here. I don't think it's necessary, and I just would not put it in this policy.
I would
But just to be clear, you're saying you wouldn't have it either in any of the blue language.
Any of the red language.
Any of the blue language.
I wouldn't have any in the blue for sure. I'm
Okay.
more okay.
Because I would be
red,
fine
but
with that. I'd be fine with deleting the blue language too, but
Returning it to what it was. Okay.
Just point of clarification for everybody. Board Member Ramsey was correct. It is defined if you look at the very beginning of the policy, and as in AB 481 and our policy both state that it says definition, it says governing body, the city council of the city of Berkeley or whatever. It was brought up by somebody in one of the subcommittee meetings that they wanted some reference to the PAB in there. And that's why that language was added. But yeah, you didn't see right there. It's plain and simple. It says the governing body under definitions.
Yeah, uh-huh.
well, then we really don't need it.
Yeah.
I'm not disputing any of that. That was my point.
Yeah, no, and I'm agreeing with you. It's just there's a lot of people talking about a bunch of different stuff, and that's why I'm trying to clarify what Board Member Ramsey was saying was we felt when we put this policy together that covered it. Somebody else felt at the time that they wanted something about a mention in the PAB in there, so that's why this additional language was dropped in here again.
Yeah, this was an attempt to address a concern by a member of the public who wanted to have the PAB's role in reviewing these policies and compliance explicit. No.
Well, you could still have that without referencing the governing body. I mean, you could keep the red language.
That's fine. And that happened just because there was a question about whether the PAB was the governing body or not. So.
Okay. Do you want to make a amendment to your motion, Board Member Levine? Removing the kind of the
blue.
Yeah, the blue lines. Now it's just the PAB shall review and make recommendations to City Council.
Yeah.
Okay. And Board Member Leftwich, are you going to second that?
Yes.
Okay. So, should we do a quick roll call on this, or do we need to can we just do consensus?
Why don't we see if anybody objects?
Okay. Is anyone objects on this? Doesn't seem to be that kind of a conflicted issue. All right, I don't hear or see any objections, so approved.
I'm sorry, was it Board Member Leftwich who was the mover and Levine the seconder, or the opposite?
Opposite.
It's the opposite.
Okay.
Okay, great. So I just want to note it's 8:51. We want to get to regulations. We got to text Lieutenant Montgomery too. So what's the next issue we have here?
That's it.
Okay, that's it.
Well, there was a typo.
Okay.
Right here. That was fixed. That this is nothing. Oh, I had one more thing. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sure.
We dropped in references to the special order on tear gas. And this was at the, let's see, rifles. This was at the advice of, I believe, Deputy City Attorney Mattis. And when I looked it up and I included it in this packet, it's actually Special Order 2020 something. is also known as policy 1107. And the reason I thought that was important, because when I went looking for that special order, it was actually easier to find it by knowing that it was policy 1107. So I was just gonna suggest that we change,
To the
that we
policy.
add that when we reference
Oh,
the
cool.
special order, that we also call it policy here. Here we go.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with being clear, so there's no confusion around where to find the actual
Right.
policy or special order. you're gonna do
I guess I
parenthetical?
would say,
Also called, or just doing parenthetical?
yeah, maybe do it like this.
Yeah, I think that's better. Just be clean.
Yeah.
Any
Any issues with that, anybody?
that's just a citation issue. That's not a
Right.
no substantive or tone at all. I don't hear or see any concerns about
And I
that.
think there's other references, so I'll make sure that I catch,
The references to special order 2020-007. Okay.
right.
Okay, great. So you're gonna edit those globally, and also you're gonna add in that language that board member Ramsey edited into the various rifles around the authorized use authorization. Oh, and Lieutenant Montgomery is here. Lieutenant Montgomery, we're about to complete this and shift into regulations. You came in just in time.
Thank you.
Do we have anything else, Director Lee?
I think that's it. That's all that's in my memo.
Does anyone else recall anything that we're missing, or think that we need to hit anything else?
Well, the final thing I said in the memo was the subcommittee determined that other policies associated with policy 709 did not need revision at this time. So the referral from council was associated use policies. Now, this is one of them. This is the military equipment use policy. And the other associated policies would be the policies that are all referenced here. And the subcommittee determined there was no need to review these right now.
Can you pull that up really quickly? Maybe board members Ramsey and Moore can just quickly tell us that.
It's right here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, 300 through 811. Do you have any concerns about those policies, use policies?
I did not, and the department confirmed that none of these policies, had been changed.
It hadn't been changed since when? Just
Right, and it's during the process of coming up with these new uses and so forth. So
I see. Board member Moore, is that your same reflection as well?
Yes, that is.
Okay, so I'm fine with that. Does anyone
these
else?
are all policies that have been reviewed by the PRC or PAB and implemented,
Have not changed.
and they've not changed since then. So.
Okay. Everyone wants to take a quick look over these and okay, any questions or comments on these? Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing any, so I think we can move on.
Okay, so I think you need one final vote, which is I'm trying to figure out how to
Approve
how
the,
it might be, worded, because you want to, I think you want to approve this recommendation to send this on as we've edited here,
okay,
except for those specific sections that there were votes on that you didn't completely agree with. And I guess I'll have to break those out so that the council is aware of certain sections that perhaps were more controversial than others.
which will flag in the letter. So does someone want to raise that motion? We move to approve the changes as determined during these meetings, as agreed by the board.
Motion to recommend
To recommend,
that the council adopt policy 709,
709, as described therein, or
to the attached, I think I'll refer to the attached policy
okay,
709
With our edits and subject to our.
Right, as revised. Because
Subject,
we've revised, what we've done is we've revised the department's submittal.
Uh-huh.
okay. That's right. Does,
Can I say, I don't understand why you would pull out amendments that have failed. I mean, it's like 709.2. I mean, it was 5-3. I don't know about whether it should say prohibited. I don't think you should pull that out. The amendment failed. Now we're going to take a vote. I mean, I voted in it, guy voted down. I voted in the noes, lost. So
Okay,
why are
well,
we going to pull out
the
every single vote that we've had?
Okay, the only reason
How
I
are you going to
suggest,
distinguish between ones that are pulled out and ones that aren't?
well, the reason I thought to do that is because so that you could vote for sending this to council, and maybe, that's not inconsistent.
Yeah, we should have to vote up or down. I mean, it's not like we're going to pull out all the changes and make notes for them about things that the subcommittee did. Everything else. We
does
just
that
say,
provide?
"Wow."
Yeah, so I mean, the way that Board Member Ramsey is describing it seems a little simpler, but for your efforts directly, because you're going to have to draft, with me a
It's a
letter.
lot easier for me, I can tell you that.
Yeah. And
I don't have any objection. I just thought that for the sake of each individual board member, they might feel more comfortable if they could say, well, I agreed with everything except this, but that's up to you. And I have no objection to.
And those are all amendments that have failed.
Okay. So as a board,
board.
We did have some concerns.
No, they haven't all failed.
Right. I mean, the ones that didn't fail will be incorporated and we'll vote yes or no on them. Just like the ones that worked that I voted no against, I'm not going to ask for a minority report.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so no minority report.
Well, somebody still needs to make the motion and they could.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I agree essentially with what Board Member Ramsey is saying, except that there was clear discussion about including in this letter or memo that there was desire by members of the board for further study in these specific areas. One was about the chemical agents, and the other was, I can't remember.
Yeah, those footnotes were all voted on and agreed to.
So those will be in the letter. Yeah. So he's referring to.
Okay, so as long as that's included, I agree with what Member Ramsey is saying.
Great. So no dissenting opinion to be sent out, but just the what's a majority opinion was those commentaries. Okay, cool. Does someone want to make that motion? Board Member Ramsey, you would just kind of basically specify.
Yeah, I'll move to approve the policy as amended.
I'll second that.
Could you put that, recommend that the council approve?
Yeah,
yes, recommend, I'm sorry.
Great, that's more specific. Thank you. Recommend that the council approve the policy as amended by the board, the PAB, and board.
I seconded that.
Board member seconded. Are there any objections?
For this one, let's take a roll call. So just we have it on the record.
Okay, so this is a global
pretty
thing.
Significant vote.
Cool.
Okay, on that motion to send this revised version to the city council, Board Member Calavita?
Yes.
Chair Chang?
Yes.
Board Member Lefwich?
Yes.
Board Member Levine?
Yes.
Board Member Mizell?
Pass. Let me think of another 20 seconds.
Okay. Board Member Moore?
Yes.
Board Member Owens?
Yes.
Board Member Ramsey?
Yes.
Vice Chair Mizell?
I mean, can I ask my colleagues just a practical question? Would me voting yes on this imply I'm endorsing the process that led us to this particular review?
I don't know.
I would say it's the
Yes, for whatever reasons you want.
I'd say it'd be the product and not the process.
Yeah, I would agree.
That's a good explanation. Yeah.
Well, I'll vote yes with a strong caveat about the process.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're free to communicate in your individual capacity to the council, Vice Chair.
I will do so, Chair, or I will do so, Director. Thank you.
Okay. Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, great. So moving on to the regulations.
Are we allowed to move to dissolve the subcommittee?
Oh, yeah, good idea. Should we wait or should we do that?
I'll agendize that for next week.
Okay.
Because it's not really agendized. Board
All
member
right.
Ramsey.
It's not an agenda. It's better to agenda.
I'll make a note on that.
Will you
Chair-
distribute this letter, this memo to us that you're sending to the council?
Can I send it to? Absolutely. I'll send it to you at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I will agendize, dissolve patrol equipment subcommittee.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah, we're
Moving on. I really need a short break.
Okay. Should we take a 3-minute break then, or?
Yes.
Okay, let's take a 3-minute break. I think I should have said 5 minutes instead of 3. That sounded a little 3 minutes is a little short. Did everybody have enough time for the break? I know it's a long meeting. Okay, so it looks like most folks are back. Should we wait another minute? And it looks like Investigator Thomas is with us, who has come on board since we took a break, and Lieutenant Montgomery had come on previously as well. So we'll give them like maybe another up to a minute as folks come back on. Okay, in the meantime, should we pull up the permanent regs? And we were following the memo as well. We had 1 or 2 last things on it. We're not going through it de novo or en masse. We're just going through linearly in progression on that memo, which we're pretty close to completion. And that is from the July 13th, 2022 packet. And the memo was from what date again? Could you remind us? I don't recall. Is that like the May
20th.
May 20th. Oh, okay.
But that should be in the packet, in the July 13th packet as well.
Yeah, that's what my recollection is. So if you pull it up online, you should be able to have that, or pull up the hard copy.
I don't see the memo, but.
Oh, okay, let's see. Director Lee, do you know what page of the packet the memo was on?
Well, Board Member Leftwich said she doesn't see it, so I could have been mistaken.
Okay, so let's see, July 13th.
What memo are we talking about?
It's
memo that Kathy wrote highlighting some issues that we were going to have the board discuss, and that some of them are going to the city attorney's office.
We were going in line down each of the issues as a form of like a structure.
I think it was in the previous packet, the one prior to July 13th.
Yeah, it might have
July 5th.
been.
Okay, let's pull up the July 5th agenda packet.
Not July 5th.
No, we didn't meet on July 5th.
I'm sorry, July 5th.
Sixth. Oh, no, the 8th. No.
Oh, was it the 8th?
Oh, that's June 8th. I'm sorry.
If Kathy, maybe if you just have it someplace you could.
Yeah, I'm looking for it right now. Well, first I'm looking for the draft itself that we should be working on.
Okay.
Oh, I think it's June 29th, page 32 of that packet, at least 31.
So you can pull up online on the PAB's website, and you click on the inside the agenda packet itself, page 31.
Oh, okay. I think we had it a couple of places. Now I'm looking at June 22nd, page 31.
June 22nd, not June 29th. Okay. Let's pull up June 22nd.
Page 31.
Okay, of the agenda packet, not the supplemental.
Yeah, actually it's on June 29th also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What page is it on June 29th? Just make sure that we have the latest.
5.
Page 5 of the agenda packet on June 29th, which is online. Folks in the public can pull that up too. All right, so the May 20th, 2022 memo from Director Lee to the Police Accountability Board with regard to draft permanent regulation for handling investigations and complaint issues for full discussion. There were 6 different items, and let's remind ourselves.
Through these, actually, didn't we get through them all?
Yes.
I thought we got through them all.
Yeah.
We did.
We're done with regulations, then?
Yes, we're done.
Like it.
Well, then, Board Member Levine provided that language
Yeah,
about
right.
the
There's
complaint.
a comment about, and I think it's worth discussing a bit.
Okay, I think if we're going in order, that Board member Calavita actually had some comments.
Yes.
So
Well-
let's look at that. I'll
And
pull
we
that up.
also is the DCA Chang is here, and do we
I
want?
wonder if we want to let him go first, actually.
Yeah, just to give an overview of where they're at and some of this requested information.
Certainly. Happy to do that.
Sure.
Okay.
So I have three items that I want to address the board on tonight. The first of which is procedural, and just to give you some visibility into the next procedural steps in terms of the process for adoption of these regulations and what happens, what we see is happening next after this current round of consideration by the PAB, and then two substantive items on some issues where PAB has requested our advice, and that's on the issue of board initiated complaints, and then on the board's role in directing or performing investigations, and the delineation of the responsibilities as between the board and the director. And so on the first item, starting with the process for adoption, I know that the board has been very focused on completing the proposed draft regulations, but we also want to give you an overview of some of the steps that will be coming next, and our office's role in that, as well as the role of other bodies and the city council. So once PAB completes its initial drafting of the proposed final regulations, the city attorney's office will conduct a comprehensive legal review, and then, if needed, return the proposed regulations to PAB for consideration of any city attorney comments, to the extent that we have any comments that might impact the regulations. After PAB completes its initial drafting, some of the proposed regulations are subject to a mandatory meet and confer process with the police union, the BPA. This is required by state labor law, the Myers-Milius-Brown Act, to the extent that the investigation procedures are deemed to impact the terms and conditions of police officers' employment. This meet and confer process must be completed before the city council may adopt the regulations in their final form. And we anticipate that this process would be likely to take several months. The city council will direct the meet and confer process, or in the council's discretion, council may delegate that role in whole or in part to the DPA or to the board. And we will be providing further advice on the next steps in terms of that meet and confer process, but I just wanted to outline that for you so that you understand what's coming down the pike in terms of the next steps in this process. The second issue that I wanted to address is a substantive question that the board has posed to our office regarding board-initiated complaints. And we will be providing you with further written advice and analysis as part of our comprehensive review of the regulations. But in response to the board's inquiry, we can advise you verbally of our preliminary assessment that the charter does not authorize the board to initiate investigations on its own. And our assessment is based on the charter's plain language. The section 125(2)(b) of the charter defines a complainant as a member of the public. And in numerous other provisions of the charter, there's also references to complaints being brought by members of the public. For example, at section 125(3)(a)(3), which discusses the board's power to receive and consider the findings and recommendations of the director regarding complaints filed by members of the public. The board members are officers of the city, and when acting in that capacity, are not members of the public. Board members are appointed by the city council, subject to term limits, subject to the Political Reform Act, and other state and local conflict of interest codes, receive compensation for their service, and are sworn into service. And all of those factors distinguish them from members of the public. If a charter amendment or ordinance were proposed to grant PAB explicit authority to initiate investigations, we would assess that proposal and provide further advice, and also look to the relation to other laws in in providing advice as to how that charter amendment would square with other laws such as POBRA and other considerations. The final subject that I want to address with respect to substantive questions that the board has posed to our office is the board's role in directing or performing investigations. Our assessment is that the charter assigns the function of performing investigations to the director. Charter Section 1 states that the purpose of the Director of Police Accountability is to investigate complaints. The board's role is, and this is from Section 3A3 of the charter, to receive and consider the findings and recommendations of the director and to recommend discipline if warranted. Charter Section 18I also discusses that the director shall submit and present findings to the board, and the board may affirm, modify, or reject the findings. And so in interpreting this language, we see a clear delineation of responsibilities between the director and the board. And this is also reflected in the city attorney's impartial analysis of Measure II, in which our office opined that the complaint would be investigated by the director and decided on by the board. Our assessment then is that the board cannot direct the director to conduct its investigations in a particular manner. Rather, the board's role is to receive and consider the director's findings. Of course, nothing prevents the board from providing feedback or suggestions to the director for further investigation, and for the director and the board to engage in a collaborative process, but the board cannot require or mandate that the director conduct investigations in a particular manner.
Can I interrupt just for 1 second?
I'm actually done, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, I'm just wondering, it sounds like you're giving legal advice. Is this an attorney-client communication? How we had a communication with city attorneys in the past in a closed session, but this is public.
So the board, through the director, has asked our office for advice on certain legal issues relating to the board's consideration of the regulations, and we are able to provide this essentially policy advice through our legal lens in a public open session. We are also prepared when we provide you with written advice to do so in a publicly accessible and open format. So I'll turn it back to the chair.
Great, thank you. Are there any further questions for DCA Chang? Board Member Ramsey has his hand raised, and thank you, Deputy City Attorney Chang, for the verbal.
Yeah. I have just one basic question. I just want to get some, further clarification on. I understand about the definition of who's a complainant, et cetera. There is one very specific section that we were asking you to interpret when it came to whether the board could initiate the complaint. I'm kind of looking in the charter right now, and I just can't remember the exact section. Do you remember that paragraph that was somewhat confusing about initiating a complaint versus an investigation? Do you remember that section number by any chance?
In the regulations?
No, in the charter.
No, the charter.
It's
in
14,
the charter itself.
I have it. It's 14. F.
F as in Frank?
Yes. I believe this is what you're referring to, Board Member Ramsey. In addition.
So just give me just a second. So if I share screen, then this section right here,
yeah,
in addition to the duties prescribed. says upon receipt of a complaint by the Police Accountability Board. I understand there are a lot of discussions about who's a complainant, et cetera, but this says complaint by the Police Accountability Board.
So we read that as received by. That is, that the complaint has been made to and received by, not that the Police Accountability Board is the complainant.
Mm-hmm.
And it further, it's referencing that term complaint, which we have construed as complaint being filed by a member of the public.
So you're interpreting this essentially as upon the Police Accountability Board receiving a complaint.
That's right.
Okay, that way I just couldn't remember whether that was the exact section. That was confusing.
That was one of the sections.
Yeah, I thought there was another. I thought there was another one, but unfortunately, I'm not adept enough to find it just now. But if you hold on while other people have the discussion, I may be able to. On my own, and then if you could come back to me, that would be great. But
sure, and I'm happy to address and entertain these questions to the extent that I can. I do want to emphasize that this is the advice that has been approved by the city attorney for me to render tonight as a preliminary assessment, and I'm happy to take any feedback back to our office and further consider it. And again, we will be providing you with a more extensive written analysis as part of our review of the regulations.
Yeah, that'd be super helpful. Board Member Vice Chair Mizell.
Thank you, and thank you, DCA Chang, for the advice. Obviously, I understand your role, and you are simply carrying that out to the best of your all's ability, and I do appreciate and understand that. I wanted to ask then, and I don't think this was one of our questions in the memo, so you may not be able to respond. I understand that, but to me, if the preliminary analysis is correct, and that's what you find in your final analysis, then I think as the board, wouldn't it make sense for us to expand the availability of complaints to the widest swath possible of the public, whether it's direct public members or having organizations perhaps file on behalf of individuals? I would, if we don't have the ability to initiate any type of complaint, is there any legal issue you could see us running into if we simply expand the potential pool to, well, it says members of the public, so I think it already is, but is there any issue in terms of allowing third parties, for instance, file complaints on behalf of an individual if they clearly give their consent?
Our interpretation is that a complainant is a member of the public. I think what you're asking is if a complainant can be represented by an organization or by an advocate or by an attorney. Speaking off the cuff, I don't see any conflict between that situation and the charter's language, but that's certainly something that I can take back and we can look a little further at.
That'd be helpful, Director Lee, if you're aware of that practice at the PRC as well, and the PAB is different, but it is a common practice in some other contexts with administrative lawyering, for example, where there's a minor, or as you were saying, DCA Chang, with an advocate of some sort standing in the place of the complainant. But it does have some investigatory aspects to that in terms of access to information. But it certainly applies, I would think, to a circumstance with a minor. But Director Lee, I'm just curious about that question. Have you had experience with that?
Minors specifically?
Or just in general as a third party filing a complaint who is not directly adversely harmed?
No, because the PRC couldn't even accept complaints from eyewitnesses. So that was more restrictive than currently. We would, if a minor wanted to file a complaint, we would require that it be a parent or guardian file it for them on their behalf.
So thanks for that question, Vice Chair Mizell, and DCA Chang, if you could add that to some of the lists of stuff. Vice Chair Mizell, you're continuing, you still have your hand raised, or?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify for the board. Yeah, my thought there really is just to ensure we don't run into an issue in terms of those definitions. And I'd want to make it clear in the charter that it is available to individuals, and they can file on with the help of a third party if needed.
Thank you. Board Member Ramsey, do you still have your hand up from previously, or?
Yeah, I did. I just had one follow-up question that related to that. I understand that the charter allows the city council to implement an ordinance. I understand even if we had done that, the board could initiate an investigation. That would have been subject to meet and confer, correct? And so in some sense, we can just ask the city council and the city council would have had to, ratify the regulations anyway. So rather than asking them to put it in a regulation, we could ask the city council to put it in an ordinance. Is that what I understand? And then obviously that would be subject to meet and confer as well. But my understanding is that the charter amendment gives the council the ability to implement ordinances that it sees fit related to this. I can't remember the exact section, but you mentioned it. I actually just looked at it. It's actually in the Police Accountability Board and Powers and Duties. And that's, here, I'll do a quick little share screen just so you know where I'm talking about.
Right.
So this is the share screen here, and I think this is what you're referencing to. So this talks about Police Accountability Board powers and duties. It says it has the following powers, 1 through 6. And then it says any other powers and duties as the council may assign it by ordinance. So is my understanding that this is where you say the council could give us the power to initiate complaints by passing an ordinance, and then that obviously would probably be subject to meet and confer.
So I was observing that this board has discussed in the past that if the advice rendered by our office is that the charter language currently does not permit the board to initiate investigations, that some on the board wanted to seek an ordinance from the council. And so I was referencing those discussions. If such an ordinance were proposed, we'd be happy to assess it for example, any meet and confer requirements, as well as the interplay of the ordinance and that proposed procedure with any other laws.
Okay. Do you think that this charter section that I'm talking about here, does that authorize the council to provide us the power to initiate an investigation?
I'd like to assess that a little more closely with other attorneys in my office, but I understand that there has been some discussion about seeking an ordinance, and so I understand your question to be, is such an ordinance permissible under the charter? Am I accurate?
Yeah, so I mean, this is specifically under Police Accountability Board has the following powers and duties. So it lays out the powers, and then number 7, and it also says in any other powers and duties that the council may assign it by ordinance. So like I said, I mean, this might be, form over substance. If they vote to ratify it by regulation or they vote to ratify it by ordinance. So if it's just a matter of us asking it not as a regulation, but asking it as an ordinance that gives us the power to do it, then it just seems like, okay, that's form over substance. And we should just ask for an ordinance rather than ask for a regulation. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to understand where you say we don't have the power to put it into our regulation without something further based just on the plain language of the charter. But I'm saying here, the plain language of the charter seems to authorize the council to assign additional powers to the Police Accountability Board by ordinance. So when we're trying to figure out, based on your advice, what we should do going forward, I think all of us on the board generally think we should, as a board, be able to initiate regulations. And if we're not able to do it under the explicit language of the charter, I'm trying to see whether you guys do believe that that's something that we could properly ask the council to give us that power under this section here, this subsection 7, any other powers and duties as the council may assign it by ordinance. Because that, from the plain language of the charter, seems to be, me at least, fairly straightforward, that they could give us the power if they pass an ordinance.
Right. And I understand that reading and that question, and I'll confirm that view with others in my office.
And following, I just think for myself, following your recommendation based on your other interpretation of the language, that we can't just put it in the regulation by ourselves, that, I would want to see whether we have power to do this, because that's what I would recommend. I'd recommend that they pass an ordinance that gives us the power to initiate investigations at the same time that we are, trying to place it into the regulations, that it would be done concurrently. Or as a 1-2 punch, they could pass the ordinance and then they could turn around and ratify the regulation.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. And DCA Chang, I just want to make sure I understand. So I agree with Board Member Ramsey that the interpretation of this number 7 here does seem to strongly suggest that the city could go ahead and pass an ordinance, with all the other regulations in mind with regard to powers and duties of the PAB. Is the notion that a board initiated investigation may need more, is that fully cured on your end, or is that a preliminary assessment?
So it is a preliminary assessment, that we have discussed internally, and that the city attorney has signed off on rendering tonight verbally. We were intending to provide you with further analysis to explain that assessment. I don't want to get ahead of this. I don't anticipate that view will change, but we were planning to firm it up and provide you with just a more extensive explanation of it.
Okay, thank you. And so the ordinance aspect is I thank you around the form and substance conversation, Board Member Ramsey. That's super helpful. Board Member Leftwich, Board Member Calavita, Board Member Owens.
Yeah, well, I had two points. The first was the point that was just made by Board Member Ramsey. That's what jumped out at me as well. I was going to ask about that. The second thing is under the process, your third point, you said something about council will direct or may delegate, I guess, the process around meet and confer. I wasn't clear what you meant by that.
Sure. So the proposed regulations will be subject to essentially a labor negotiation process that is similar in terms of the procedure to the labor negotiation, for example, for a union contract. And that involves a labor negotiator at the table with a union negotiator going through proposals and counter proposals. And that negotiation could lead to changes in the language of the proposed regulations. And so the councils as the as the highest body in the city has the power to direct that process. What we are still putting together a further legal analysis of what that process will require, but we anticipate that the council will establish some type of protocol in terms of who the negotiator is, who the negotiator reports to. Ultimately, council has that power. Council, of course, may also delegate that power. And so that's just one of the options that we're laying out, is that the council could, for example, delegate that role to the director or to the board, or the council may keep that for themselves, which it often does in labor negotiations.
Okay, I guess this has come up before, because if the board is advocating for a particular position and it isn't a legal matter, it's just, a policy matter, it would seem strange to have the council do it, or anyway, it's just the process seems a little strange unless it's someone who would truly be advocating for us. You know what I mean? And somebody in the city council might be worried that, well, maybe the city's going to get sued over this, so we'll drop it, versus, and also if, say it's not us, that none of us on this board are involved in that process and it's somebody else, does that person then come back to us and say, look, they want to do X? Do they then ask us if X is okay? Or is that person, whoever it is, just make those decisions?
So those are exactly the types of process issues that will be worked out by council in terms of how they structure the meet and confer process, and who they appoint and how they delegate their responsibility. During the labor negotiation, the city is sitting at the table in their capacity as the employer. And it's an employer and employees representative negotiation, and so that's the context under which they're having that discussion, and that's why it's the city council as the highest body in the city that employs the police officers that has the ultimate authority over that employment responsibility.
Okay. Guess I don't totally get it, but I guess it'll be made more clear as the process evolves. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Calavita. And just check-in time is 9:38.
Yes, thank you for that, for your explanations, and counsel. I think that there's some confusion when we talk about whether the board can initiate investigations and file complaints, because I see these as distinct things. And when I have been talking about the board triggering an investigation, I have meant, and I guess I'm in the form of a question, would it be permissible for the board to request that the director initiate a fact-finding investigation independent of a formal complaint being filed? In other words, is it possible for the board to ask the director to do fact-finding with regard to an incident that we know about and we need to learn more about, that could lead to a complaint being filed? But I'm talking about an investigation that's more a fact-finding inquiry process. Is that something that you've discussed?
So we have focused our inquiry on the definition of a complaint, and that is something that is brought by a complainant that is a member of the public, and been looking at the charter language that references investigations in the context of complaints. So generally, most of the discussions about the director's investigations are regarding the director's investigations into complaints brought by members of the public.
Right. Okay. But a number of us, many of us, believe that we cannot fulfill our oversight function unless we have the authority to ask the director to initiate a fact-finding process. That's not something you all have discussed?
We're construing the charter's language, and we read the charter to not authorize that under the current language.
Not authorize a fact-finding process independent of a complaint having been filed?
So I guess I'm a little unclear as to the fact-finding as opposed to an investigation.
Well, let me give you some examples. In the past year or two, there have been several incidents that have not resulted in a complaint being filed, but that we as an oversight body felt responsible for finding out more facts about that incident. One of them being the inebriated man who was taken in and then put out on the street and ultimately died. And we don't know, we have no allegation to make about police misconduct, but we want to find more out about this case. that would seem absolutely central to an oversight body. But we're not alleging misconduct, but we want facts.
Could I interject at this point to specifically address the situation that Board Member Calavita is raising, and that is, in that particular case that she mentions, it has been treated by our office as a complaint because we do not have any other way. We don't currently have in our interim regulations just a fact-finding investigation. And so that going through that process, following those procedures was the only way we felt that we could handle that.
And it results in
not the concern. Is that not the concern that under that interpretation that we're hearing from the city attorney's office, you'd have to close that investigation?
Well, now that I'm hearing this, yes, it is a concern.
And then you have the person who's deceased, homeless with no family, and so then there's no one who can make a complaint.
Right.
Not even a complaint, because you're 100% right, Board Member Calavita. What we're talking about is investigating. I apologize if I had that. So in that situation, despite the fact that there is, someone who was left outside in the cold who ultimately died, then we are not in a position that we're able to investigate that.
You said we could ask questions. Isn't that the ultimate question? We had public members lining up and speaking, the most we've ever had, to ask those questions. What happened? You have to find out, board members. Are we to then say to them, gee, I'm sorry, we can't ask questions, we can't initiate or request an investigation because then it's a complaint and we can't do that?
It seems to me that...
Can I jump in there?
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
So for me, and Board Member Calavita said it very well, for me, a complaint is different than an investigation. And my position on the subcommittee was, I don't think it's appropriate for the board to initiate a complaint. Because if we initiate the complaint, we're also the hearing body. But I do believe that the board should have the ability to initiate an investigation, because I think that there has to be a mechanism. And if you look at the question that was in the director's memo, the question says that we propose a provision allowing the board to initiate an investigation as opposed to a complaint. So we didn't ask about the complaint, we asked about the investigation. And what you've come back with is said, no, we can't complain. We can't be the complaint. But at some point, we have to have the ability to look into incidents that happen. And, I don't feel comfortable that our director went forward with what we asked for in an investigation as a complaint, because a complaint is generally against an officer or officers. And we did not know what happened. So we weren't complaining about anybody's behavior. We weren't complaining about anything. Basically, what we were saying is we just want to find out what happened because we were getting that question from the community. So for me, what I'm looking for is, can the board initiate an investigation? Not a complaint, but an investigation. So can we look into an incident that happens, get an understanding of what happens? We also kind of took it a step forward and we kind of discussed, and I don't know where we landed on this, but we also discussed that, is it possible that in the process of doing this investigation, one of the solutions could be, because I don't think it's appropriate for the board to initiate a complaint, but one of the solutions could be, as the director is doing their role and looking into what happened in this incident in an investigation, that the director can be given the authority to initiate the complaint and say, okay, I did this investigation. I see some, potential issues with XYZ's behavior. And then the complainant would effectively be the director's office. And we would do the hearing or whatever would be appropriate based on that complaint. So that way it separates our duties. We're not complaining and then doing the hearing. That was my That was my thought process. I don't know if anybody else agrees with that, but I think we're all, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're all on the same page that the board needs the authority to do an investigation. Because if we don't have that authority, when somebody comes in or when the community comes in and says, this event happened, I think that's appropriate that that's what we do as an oversight body. Is to
We're
look
not
at
doing
what
the,
happened.
we're not doing the investigation, right? We
No,
would-
no, the director would do the investigation.
Yeah,
We would not do any investigation, but I think it's appropriate that we, as a board, request that the staff and the director do an investigation and report back to the board as to what they find. Now, that complaint process and whatever complaints that come from that, I don't think we ever settled on how that would work. But I don't believe that the board should initiate a complaint, because I think there's a blending of, okay, we do the complaint and we do the hearing. I mean, I don't think I think it would be kind of biased. So that's, I think we're all on the same page. You guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're all on the same page that at minimum, we should be able to do an investigation.
Yeah,
And that's different from a complaint.
Yeah, and I'm on that regs committee as well. And DCA Chang, as you're hearing, if you can make sure to take this back with that kind of specificity that Board Member Owens is reflecting, and you know, as an attorney that, and a number of us here are too, in different types of jurisdictional practices, agencies do initiate their own investigations. Directed investigations are often called through a similar mechanism that Board Member Owens is describing. Where you, obviously the agency head is not filing a complaint, they are initiating an investigation based upon factually specific individualized concerns that have been raised that indicate potential compliance issues that rise to the sufficiency of opening up an investigation. So that's a really important issue here, that if you could make sure that we have both like citation support as relevant and also specificity as to the difference between opening a complaint versus asking a director to open an investigation.
Right, and I will certainly take that back and review it with others in my office. And I think one perhaps point to consider is the consequence of labeling something a complaint or an investigation. The charter is very clear that the board considers complaints filed by members of the public to recommend discipline if warranted when misconduct is found, and that charter section 3A3 explicitly refers to complaints by members of the public in connection with recommendations of discipline. So it may well be that there is some other authority to conduct investigations for the purposes of making findings and issuing reports, but not in connection with recommending discipline, which has its own implications, also, with respect to the labor law issues that we identified, right? And so that might be, and I'm kind of speaking on my own off the cuff here, but that might be a way that we can harmonize or resolve this, is by looking at it in that context and giving investigation a different meaning than complaint. But when it marries into the complaint procedure that results in a recommendation of discipline, that is, I think, where we're pretty clear that the charter does not authorize it. But again, I'm understanding and I'm taking in all of what the board is expressing tonight, and we will look at these issues more closely.
Yeah, thank you. Those are all helpful commentary. Board Member Calavita and Board Member Ramsey, and then Board Member Levine.
I just wanted to say that many of us still do believe that we need an ordinance that allows the board or its director to initiate complaints. Not only investigations. If we're not allowed to request investigations, then we should also request in an ordinance that we be allowed to do that. But I think many of us also believe that the board also has to have the authority after an investigation to file a complaint. Thank you. That's all.
Thanks. And the complaint meaning that they would go down the pathway of potential misconduct allegations and potential disciplinary outcomes if it's factually shown to be necessary.
Of course, it has layers of protection. It goes to the chief and then the city manager. So
Right. All those guardrails would still be in place. DCA Chang, we're not saying that we're doing something completely separate from the existing procedures in state law and POBRA. Board Member Levine and then Board Member Ramsey. And it is 9:52, just time check.
Well, just to point out in support of what's being said, that we have an obligation to review policy. And it may be that an investigation points to the need for a policy change or a policy recommendation and may not lead to a complaint at all. So, that sort of supports your dichotomy, Mr. Chang.
Right, and there is a separate authority provided in the charter in section 3A1 for the board to advise and make recommendations to the public, city council, and city manager regarding the operation of the police department. And so, to the extent that the board is exercising its oversight function in that way in terms of recommending operational changes, that is consistent with the charter. I think the way that we've been looking at the question of board initiated investigations is as those that enter onto the track of making a recommendation of discipline. And we see that as being confined to complaints filed by members of the public, just to clarify the way that we're looking at it.
Okay, thank you. And do we still have Board Member Calavita and then Board Member Ramsey? Or
no.
Okay, Board Member Ramsey.
Yeah, I want to put a little bit of a finer point because so far we've been asking you to interpret the charter. I want to actually change this to get actual legal advice about how we accomplish something that we want to accomplish. Because I think all of us agree that the board should be able to initiate a investigation, as Board Member Owens may, articulated very well. That's what we want to do. I think a large number of us would potentially also like to have that investigation potentially result in a complaint, not necessarily brought by the board, but maybe by the director of police accountability or someone else. So given that that's what we want to accomplish, what I would love is not an interpretation of the charter, but rather 3 options about the most legally defensible ways to accomplish those goals. And to come back with that and say, we know you want to do this, here are the most legally defensible ways. And I would exclude from those options amending the charter, because I understand that's going to be the most legally defensible way, but that's not something that any of us are going to want to do. So you can go ahead and exclude that. But if you could give us the 3 most legally defensible ways to accomplish those goals, I think that would be very useful. And whether it's put into regulation and have meeting and confer, put into an ordinance and a regulation, or move forward on the section you just talked about, fine. But whatever the 3 most legally defensible means of doing that is, both of those things, initiating an investigation, and then the subpart of that is coming out of that fact investigation so that someone, other than the member of the public could initiate could initiate a complaint. That's what would be most useful for that. Because then I think we could actually make some progress on our regulations and vote on those options and move forward, because none of us disagree about what we should be able to do, at least in terms of initiating an investigation.
Thank you, that's helpful. DCA Chang, could you consider those as requested?
Yes, I understand. You're asking for advice on how legal authority could be granted to initiate complaints or investigations that could result in recommendations.
Yeah, what's the most legally defensible, 3 most legally defensible ways, 3. And then you can tell us, which ones you think the most, the next most, and the least most defensible means of accomplishing those goals.
Understood.
Yeah, and mind you, while this is based upon the assumption that we're moving towards, we have the charter amendment, which is intended as a modern police oversight, and while the language in the charter was not specific to it due to ambiguity and not clarity, we interpret it as quite important to the intent behind the passage of the charter amendment, which is for a modern police authority. And to miss that piece seems to be counter to that intent. So that's the motivation here. Board Member Leftwich, and then Board Member Calavita, then Board Member Owens.
And I wanted to echo what Board Member Ramsey was saying. And think what we're asking you to be also is to be our advocate. And that's something that's come up in the past with the city attorney's office, that if you're our attorney, we want you to be our advocate, as well as, you know, not just a roadblock, basically defending the city against a potential lawsuit, but advocating for us. And so I like the idea of you giving us an analysis, and that would clearly need to be attorney-client privileged and given to us in a closed session if you're spelling out what the least defensible track would be. And if we go down that track, it's like, well, open session, your own attorney said that wouldn't work. So again, we're kind of asking for, and at least I think we would all appreciate that, for the city attorney's office to kind of tweak its role and be our representative and our advocate.
Thank you. And that's an advocate in the context of the stated intent. If you look at the charter amendment, the mission of the purpose of the revamped PAB, open and transparent policing, et cetera. So I think those are aligned with this notion of the city attorney's office being very much in tune with ensuring that the intent of the voters is implemented, and specifically on big issues like what we're just talking about right now. So it is just noting that it's almost 10 o'clock, Board Member Calavita, and then Owens.
Yeah, very quickly, I just really support Ramsey and Lefwich's idea. Please come back to us, but with those recommendations. But also, I wanted to push back a little bit on our limited role in asking for an investigation and so forth, because the charter explicitly gives us a very powerful tool, which is the subpoena. And I'm wondering how you see the subpoena as listed in the charter in the context of what you're telling us here. So what is the subpoena? In what way can we use a subpoena if we can't even ask for an investigation?
So we have looked into this issue, and we see the language of the subpoena is, or the authority to issue a subpoena is in relation to the respective powers and duties of the board and the director. As relevant here, the board has the power to hold hearings on the recommendations and findings of the director and to compel the attendance of witnesses at those hearings. And so we see the power of subpoena for the board as being to compel the attendance of witnesses when to testify at the findings and recommendation stage.
What about Ducas Tecum? What about documents?
Right.
So it's again, it's in relation to the powers and duties, and the powers and duties of the board are to receive the findings and recommendations and to hold hearings. And so the director also has subpoena power, and that's in the context of the director's investigative powers. And so in the context of the investigation, the director can issue subpoenas Ducas Tecum for records for the investigation.
And the board can never by itself issue Ducas Tecum subpoenas?
I want to be careful not to say never, but
what about in a policy complaint?
In a policy, what do you mean in a policy complaint?
If someone files a complaint and says that there's a policy that's, that should be handled differently, like we have one open now about mental health, and someone about how the police responded to a mental health person who was in crisis, who then ended up dying after the police left. And so there was a policy complaint filed, and we're supposed to review policy related to mental health responses. And so do we not have subpoena power related to hearings for policy complaints?
So
well, we don't have hearings on policy complaints.
We couldn't. I mean, that's the question. I'm begging that. I mean, that begs the question. If we have to decide to have a hearing on policy complaints to understand the facts that had happened, okay, surrounding the mental health response, are we not allowed to issue a subpoena related to those? Are we not allowed to issue a subpoena related to documents that may be relevant to reviewing, the facts that have generated that concern about policy?
So I understand you to be asking about the scope of the board subpoena authority, and we can analyze and provide further advice on that.
Right. I mean, if the board itself has no investigative authority and cannot request an investigation, it's unclear to me how we could use a subpoena, much less what the process would be to enforce it. But in any way, I'm putting it out there because it seems to me the charter gives us very powerful tools in some instances, but in your interpretation of it, really constrains us in others, and they're inconsistent with each other.
I want to reflect on Board Member Ramsey's question. So, again, in the legal investigation context, there's concerns when there is an allegation that may be tied to a concern of policy and practice of how an individual might have been adversely harmed, say discriminated against on the basis of a statute due to practice associated with the policy. You want to be able to have the ability to look at the policy itself. In different agencies, they have regulatory authority and sometimes subpoena authority, but they often have regulatory authority to pull the relevant policies and even review the relevant policies as it is related to the practice of that policy and how it may adversely harm that individual. So in our cases, while we might have a misconduct allegation against a particular officer or officers, a policy might be triggered by the practice that's put in place based upon the policy or training. And so the kind of subpoena power there for, duce, whatever the Latin term is there, for documents, I think would be associated with that. So it would seem to constrain the ability even for the individualized allegations of misconduct against a particular officer to have a full fact-based review in an investigation that we do now, the type of complaints investigations that we do now. So that's something I think is really important to bring back in terms of it's a scope question, but it's also a pragmatic question. It's also already in practice, is my understanding. I mean, certainly I do it in my practice, the federal government, and at the state, they do that as well. So I'm curious about that interpretation of that. Director Lee has her hand raised, and then Board Member Calavita and Vice Chair Mizell.
I just don't want our Deputy City Attorney to be confused because you started out talking about a policy complaint and then it kind of ended up talking about allegations of individual misconduct. And I want to make sure that Mr. Chang understands that when we're talking about policy complaints, that's a mechanism whereby a member of the public can request that the board review a police policy, practice, or procedure. And by definition, we do not look into whether an individual officer may have committed misconduct, because that has to go through the individual, what we call the individual complaint process. And so a policy complaint could be triggered by an incident involving one or more officers, but the review of the policy does not get into specifically, did these officers do something wrong or did they follow policy? It's more, was the policy adequate? And does it need to be, does the policy need some sort of revision, or do we need new policies to prevent this terrible outcome from happening again? A terrible outcome is usually what triggers a policy review. So I wanted to make that clear.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. And it is 10:06, and Board Member Owens and Vice Chair Mizell.
So I just wanted to point out, because there was a comment made that our duty was hearings. And if you look in the charter under section 3, it outlines, that we look at the operations, written policies, practices, and procedures of the police department. We review agreements, letters of memorandum, mutual aid. So there's more than just hearing is what our duties are. So when we have a need for subpoena power, it's not just related to compelling people to appear at a hearing. it could be potentially, for the documents related to something, for an incident related to something, information related to some incident. So that I wanted to bring that up, that our duties are not just hearings. Secondarily to that we do have a couple of members of the department in our meeting here. I'm kind of curious what their perspective is as it relates to the PAB doing investigation as a fact-finding tool.
Lieutenant Montgomery, would you like to? He was Lieutenant Montgomery was the BPD's representative on the regulations subcommittee. We did have some conversation with this.
Yeah, so I guess I understand why the board would want that, and we've talked about that quite a bit before. I didn't see it in the charter as explicitly authorizing it, and so that's kind of the complication. I don't even think the charter talks about policy complaints per se, but except as the board can take up issues of policy. It doesn't talk about it in the context of a complaint. It specifically says, that you have the authority to review these things or go over them, but it's not kind of in the same way that the PRC was. I think we're using PRC language when we say policy complaint. But so that's kind of been my concern all the way along, is that it wasn't in the corners of that document. And so consequently it was expanding authority not granted by the charter.
Board Member Mizell, can I ask to yield just for a second?
Go ahead.
Is that okay, Chair?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I just want to show the share screen. So to Deputy City Attorney, this is the section that relates to subpoena. Says the Police Accountability Board and the Director of Police Accountability may issue subpoenas to compel the production of books, papers, documents, and the attendances to take testimony as needed to carry out its duties and functions. So as Board Member Owens talked about, that seems to be broad language. It's to any of its duties and functions. And then with respect to policy review, it actually specifically discusses, one second real quickly, I'm sorry. It specifically, I just looked at this. It specifically discusses and does have the language policy complaint. I'm sorry that I sort of messed this up, but if you give me just a second, so you at least see, we're talking about there's review of complaints, but then there's also a discussion about review of policy. Okay, here we are here.
Yeah,
so policy review and approval due to a policy complaint. So it is the precise language that is used in the charter. This is
my mistake. I didn't.
It's okay. It's okay. But this is part of our duties that the board may review policies, practices, and procedures of the police department in its discretion, and it says in its discretion. So there you're even talking about, you don't even need a public to initiate that at the request of the member of the public due to a policy complaint, or to be due to a member of the complaint from a member of the public against an officer. Okay, so even that talks about that it can be a specific. That's clearly within our duties. And so it does seem to me like we should have subpoena power related to that, but would definitely be interested in the opinion on that. That just seems clear from the language of the charter. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Vice Chair Ramsey. I'm sorry, no. Board Member Ramsey, are you done?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, your hand was still up. Vice Chair Mizell.
Yes, thank you, and thank you to Board Member Calavita, Board Member Harris, Board Member Ramsey. Both have really gone over the points I was going to touch. I guess, and I would mention that. I apologize to the board on this. I forgot to write up that subpoena memo, which I had mentioned several meetings back and probably several meetings before, because I've been talking about the subpoena power for a long time, and we still don't know even how to use it. And it sounds like tonight it almost got taken away from us somehow, even though it's written very clearly. I'd like to point out that in the establishment in section 1, the Police Accountability Board is hereby established by the City of Berkeley. The purpose of the board is to promote public trust through independent, objective civilian oversight of the police department. Comma, provide community participation in settings and reviewing police policies, practices, and procedures, and to provide a means for prompt, impartial, and fair investigation of complaints brought by members of the public against the Berkeley Police Department. Each of those are individual clauses. Then when we go to the Police Accountability Board's powers and duties, so section 3, we see again that 1, to advise and make recommendations to the public, city council, city manager around all written policies, practices, and procedures. We look at 2, review and recommend for council the different memoranda of understandings. I'll skip ahead for time. 3, to receive and consider the findings and recommendations of the director regarding complaints. 4, to participate in the hiring of the chief of police. And number 5, to access records of city departments, compel attendance of sworn employees of the police department, exercise the power of subpoena as necessary to carry out its functions. These are all independent clauses. A plain reading of this text would tell us that council did not constrain, or not council, or the voters, honestly, did not vote in constraining our power of subpoena to merely complaints. It's quite clearly that that power stands separately of that process in multiple sections of the charter. I just think it's clearly delineated by how these powers are mentioned. And I'd say a plain text reading, given number 4 and number 5 are not even related in any material way outside of relation to the police department. Clearly, the writers of this did not intend for it to constrain us to such a small window of what the board could possibly be doing in terms of independent oversight in this city. Again, to me, that very much spells of the thinking of the PRC and its inability to do other investigations because of how limiting the ordinance was that created the PRC. So I want to make sure that's clear. And I just want to add one just additional thing to the subpoena question, Mr. Chang, which is I would be curious as to the circumstances under which the city attorney's office, I know we've asked this previously in terms of, or similar questions in terms of when you would recuse yourself. I would wonder if you could respond to, how the city attorney's office would handle, for instance, the police union bringing some complaint or some type of demand letter against the board because of some subpoena we file that seems like a very possible outcome, no matter how many times it may be in the charter. Obviously, they have the right to do that. I'd be curious if whether it's not like in a legal memo, if you could just delineate to us what that process would look like generally, so we as board members can understand what will be going on if issues like that arise, which again I think is very likely. So I'll leave it there. But I wanted to clarify again. It's very clear in the charter. The subpoena power is for many things, and if we're to investigate anything, we need it. And I don't think the charter says we can't investigate things without having complaints filed. I think what it says is if you're going to use a complaint process, which, as you mentioned, is where the discipline would arise from, then you have to do these certain things. Not you can only use complaints, you can't investigate, you can only do it through very narrow windows. My understanding of the charter was that this is the broad strokes document, the founding document that underlies all the powers, and not that it constrains us only to a very, 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 very narrow view. And as Board Member Leftwich says, which I want to reiterate, we're all learning this new world, this new board, these new roles, and I'm sure the city attorney, with all the other work you're doing, especially, is navigating that as well. And I think the board is understanding of that. But I do believe there's more y'all could do in terms of being an advocate on our behalf in these matters. Again, I fully respect your role. Bottom line is you are the city's attorney. I understand that as well. But a lot of times in these matters, you are essentially representing us, and not us as individuals or us even as board members, but what the citizens of Berkeley, 85% of them voted to put in place in the city. And very clearly at the top of that, it was for fair, impartial, let me make sure, independent, objective civilian oversight. That's how public trust was supposed to be created. That's what the voters voted for. And I want to reiterate that point, not any, bash, anything like that. Just, I want to, reiterate that, because it's not about me, not about us. Eventually we will all be off this board, 8 years tops, 7 years from this point tops, but there will be other folks who take these places and who will be either constrained by very narrow readings or may have other opportunities to actually carry out the purpose of the charter and what voters overwhelmingly wanted in the city. So appreciate the work so far, but I wanted to reiterate those points.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And so are there any other comments or questions? So it's good that we're checking in with DCA Chang. And
yeah, I got one comment kind of focusing on the subpoenas. So I don't want people to get the idea that we don't want to provide information. We won't provide information. We're also constrained, though, in other ways. There are laws that would stop us sometimes from providing information or require us to protect victims, our information from victims, and most importantly, be very thoughtful about making sure that we're complying with the other laws. And so there have been times when things are requested and we go to legal and say, okay, how do we give this out? What do we have to withhold anything given the law? And which does the charter have supremacy or state law, or, so we got to go through those issues. And sometimes that causes delays, but it's not that the department doesn't want to facilitate sort of, the oversight or give the information out. It's that sometimes they're just not real straightforward and they take time to sort out, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that does make sense. There are certain times when pockets of information that are requested might have certain forms of protection, like HIPAA, for example. Thank you. And we appreciate all the members of the BPD being here with us today. And so I'm looking at the time, that's 10:19. So we do have one more meeting on the 26th, and then we go into recess. And we all know that Director Lee is going to be retiring soon.
The 27th.
27th, I apologize. The 27th. So, and then we have a retirement coming up, and we're going to have a full month away, and then we'll have to drop back in and get our brains back into things. So on the 27th, we certainly want to finish anything that's remaining in the regulations. Is there anything, I'm hearing that, the memo seemed to address a lot of the items that were still, some things may have to be hashed out at the city attorney level. And, we're engaging with the city attorney's office with providing our feedback on our thinking on some of this, which is coming from I would interpret this DCA as not just a scope issue, but also in the context of like a practice issue in terms of how the PAB is going to get around some of these thorny fact patterns that might come in the door, we might see in the future. And we want to be able to have the proper tools as indicated by the motivation behind the charter amendment, which should mean that we have substantially different types of scope of authority than the PRC. And we're concerned that we don't want to replicate the PRC, given that there was a charter amendment put in place to enhance authority for purposes of not for creating a subjective environment, but for creating a modern version of oversight. So that's, I think, and that's where we're coming from. But so the regs, is there anything else to do tonight?
Well,
Director
we
Lee?
have those. I know we have the complaint form language, and then Board Member Calavita. I don't know if we finished informal complaints, but
no, we
I
didn't.
think we're pretty close. It would be great if we could at least focus on some specific issues rather than calling it a night.
I don't think we can do that at this late hour in light of what we've heard from Mr. Chang. So, I mean,
couldn't we at least look at the complaint form language that Board Member Levine provided? That seems very discreet.
You know what I would suggest?
What?
I heard what Ms. Saganor said. I had the same concerns. I mulled it over. Why don't I propose some new language,
Okay.
and we just decide it next week.
Okay.
Okay. Director Lee, how does our agenda look for next week on the 27th? Sorry. Does it
Other
seem
than my saying goodbye to everybody.
Yes, I know. That's going to be our final meeting with Director Lee.
This would be, well, finishing up the regulations would be the most meaty thing. The other items, I wanted you to suggest a special meeting on September 7th. I've already, raised that, but I want you to formalize that. Need to talk about how you're going to tackle the annual equipment use report. That's the last piece under controlled equipment. And then that's due in September. And then I wanted to give you an overview of where all the complaints are, the status of all the complaints, and then your ongoing policy reviews and the things that are still sitting out there to be done.
Okay.
And that's it.
We
So
have
you
a sense.
You
Do we have a
time.
sense with the regs where it'd be great if we could go in with the roadmap? We need to focus on these 3 issues because I don't think we need to. I don't know what our plan is, whether we need to go through it. I know ultimately we need a motion that everyone's going to approve the regs, but do we know what missing pieces we still need to focus on?
I think it's just the 2 items that have been, we've gotten the memo from Board Member Calavita and then proposed language from Board Member Levine, and that's it. And then I think you should vote to send the whole thing to the city attorney.
Okay, so let's focus on that. We'll have those 2 items from Calavita and Levine.
Board Member Ramsey?
Yeah, I would just say, but we do need to have the issue decided about how to initiate a complaint.
Yeah, that's
Well,
true.
can't we also though vote on what we're proposing subject to the city attorney coming back to us, right? I mean, we know what we are proposing.
I guess we can cross that bridge when we get to it. I mean, I think we need to have the answer so that we're, so we know how we're proceeding. If we have to wait another month or 2, we got to wait a month or 2. But I want to know whether we're doing it by ordinance or regulation or some other way. But I also wanted to ask, when you're talking about agendizing, I was going to ask if we could agendize opening a policy complaint related to discharge of inebriated individuals from custody. Because understanding the city attorney's current advice, it sounds as though that investigation will be closed. And so I would like to initiate a policy complaint.
Okay, I think that's
I would ask that be
Ask
agendized.
Mr. Chang, how he thinks we should proceed, because we are eager to vote on this, but then we do understand that there are some issues that are unresolved. So what is your advice about how we should proceed, whether we should wait or whether we should go ahead?
This is an issue that we should take a closer look at, and we can have further discussions with Kathy about it. We've been opining on this in the context of the proposed regs. We've not previously been asked about this particular investigation and the.
Oh, boy.
I was asking, sorry, it's getting late. I was asking just generally, aside from the issue about a policy complaint, I was just asking how you thought we should proceed on the regs, whether we should go ahead and take a vote subject to whatever comes back from the city attorney's office, or whether we should hold off on even voting on it ourselves until we hear back from you.
Sorry, and I should say not a policy complaint, but a policy review.
Okay. So we still have that motion on the table. In the meantime, DCA Chang, Board Member Leftwich is just kind of checking in on your kind of legal advice and your strategy advice based upon your comment.
I mean, DCA Chang is frozen on my side. I don't know if that's everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's right. He was frozen. So he's fallen. Oh, he's coming back now. There he is.
Okay.
Hi there.
Sorry, my connection cut out at an inopportune time.
Yeah, now you're back. So we were asking basically not about the motion that's on the floor right now for creating a
What
policy
motion?
review.
No, no.
Well, Board Member
Yeah.
Ramsey raised it, and then I think Board Member
He
Leftwich second.
can't, no, we have to agendize that, Chair.
I'm sorry, you're right. Sorry, it wasn't agendized. For next time, he raised a agenda
Put it on the
item for
agenda.
motion for
He
next time.
asked me to put it on the agenda. That's what I'm
Okay.
gonna do.
Great, thank you. So that's for next time. But DCA Chang and basically Board Member Leftwich is asking for your opinion on, strategically speaking, should we next time around on the 27th, should we do a vote on what we have already, or do you think that it makes more sense to kind of wait a bit until you get back to us on the CA's more cured opinion on this issue of a board initiated investigation?
I think our preference would be, yeah, I think our preference would be for the regulations to come to us all together, and we could provide you with a comprehensive review and feedback, including a more extensive analysis of the advice that we provided tonight.
I see. So you'd
We
get
could go ahead.
Yeah, we probably go ahead and you'd give that. Okay. And
Well,
but
I'll
at the
just
same
say,
time,
I want to get our three options about what's most defensible. That's how I'm going to move ahead.
is that possible to have that by the 27th? Do you think, DCA Chang, do you check in with the CA? I know there's a little bit of tight time frame, but about three potential options, the most defensible manner to proceed with a board directed investigation, and also potential complaint that might emerge out of that of misconduct.
I can take that back to the city attorney. I'm not in position to commit to being able to have that ready for you by next week, but I'll certainly discuss it with the city attorney.
Thank you. And will either yourself or DCA Mattis be here, or the CA Brown will be available too, or?
It'll likely be me, and if not, it'll be Iris. But based on our schedule and our availability, I think Iris is traveling next week, so it'll likely be me again.
Okay. And do you think that the City Attorney Brown would be able to attend as well? It is going to be basically our last meeting before we shift into recess and into a new director.
I can certainly ask her. She has assigned Iris and I to be staffing this board, and so I think the expectation should be that it'll be either Iris or myself, but I'll certainly relay to her your request that she attend.
Okay, thank you. Anyone, Board Member Ramsey, you still have your hand up? Do you have another follow-up? No. Director Lee, are there any additional kind of loose ends here that we got to cover?
Well, there is one more item on the agenda, but I think it's too late to take up.
That's right. So item 4, I think we'll wait until the start of the 27th meeting, which we knew possibly might happen. Okay, let's do public comment if there's not other questions or agenda related items that people would like to address. No. Okay, so let me just pull the timer up and share the screen for the timer. Okay. Great. And we have Emily Raguso.
Thank you. Yeah, I just was waiting for the timer to start. I do want to say this has been, as usual, a fascinating discussion. I am disappointed that the board was unable to get to the one item of new business, which was a key reason I came tonight, and, very timely issue, as all of you know, because you put it on the agenda. So it's very disappointing. Well, not only understandably you can't get to everything, but maybe there could have been an announcement earlier, as the mayor sometimes tries to do, that you weren't going to get to it. It was going to be put off. I didn't hear that. So anyway, that is just something to consider in the future. The other thing, as a side note, I wanted to reference, and along this topic of everyone trying to figure out how all these processes are working. I had, as part of my job at Berkeley side, done a Public Records Act request for the documents related to the man who died outside the police station, the inebriated man. And basically have run into a roadblock and even getting those documents, in part because of what was described to me as this ongoing sort of potential misconduct complaint or investigation going on. And so I don't know, it just raises these issues around everyone wanting the public to have access to the materials it needs and not being able to get access because of this quote unquote misconduct investigation that, as was restated tonight, was initiated as more of an investigation versus a complaint. I don't know. I'm looking forward to all of these issues getting sorted out, because I think if there are records, we should be able to get them too. And we shouldn't be held up by a misconduct investigation that was initiated as something else, an investigation that had to be done as a complaint because that's the only path forward. So it just seems like a bit of a mess. And we want to get those documents and make them available to the public and look at them and understand what happened. All that said, I'm not even sure the coroner's office has signed off on a big piece of it. So maybe we're all waiting for that too. But I just wanted to raise that issue, and I appreciate everyone trying to figure out how all these pieces do work together. So thank you. And I'll definitely be here next week because unless some crazy thing happens, but I wouldn't want to miss Director Lee's final night with this body. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, so definitely don't miss next week. Everybody, you want to give Director Lee a good send off. Okay, so let me just stop sharing. Do we have, what's the last one? So basically, that's it. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Vote.
Second.
Great. Thank you so much. If there's no objections, I'm not hearing or seeing any. Thanks everybody for attending, including Lieutenant Montgomery, Captain Roleri, DCA Chang, Investigator Thomas is here as well.
Do want to give a quick shout out to Captain Roleri because this is his last meeting and he's going to be retired. He's been a great assistance to
also someone's retiring
to the board throughout the time that I've served. And I know often people are saying, "Can we get Captain Roleri here?" So we're no longer going to be able to get Captain Roleri here, but he's really been a great service to us.
Thank you, Captain Roleri. I've been in subcommittee with you before as well, and I think you've been on how many years on the BPD?
27.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay, that's a long time. And thank you for your service. And next week we'll be talking about Kathy's many years as well in the city of Berkeley. So thanks again for your 27 years of service, and hopefully you have immediate plans for rest and relaxation for retirement. Good.
I do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Thanks.